Ladies and gentlemen, it's another episode of the Big Boys Table. In fact, it's episode 73 because we're past 3 episodes after 69, but it still has a 3 in it. So what's going on, Mesk? Welcome to episode 73 of the Big Boys Table.
That's 3.
Yeah.
How am I doing? Well, I had a horrible fucking headache this morning. I was sweaty as all fuck, and all I smell is smoke all day long. So I think all those things are actually unrelated to each other.
Yeah. So you have been smashing, though. That has been a thing. We've both been smashing quite a bit, and Veek as well, who's not joining us for this episode, but in spirit. And
he's on Crazy Mountain, so he's definitely with us in spirit.
There you go. He's
the widest age you go to. The only way you can get there is by drinking heavily enough.
Well, I like to imagine he's like one of those Star Wars Force ghosts that manifests when you smash enough.
Yeah.
Either way, there has been plenty of work to sort of recap here. One of the things I noticed is that you were saying recently that if we're able to somehow manage a second voyage, it would be interesting to see what people reacted to or how people reacted to some of the more lethal things that are later in the other phases and stuff. So I guess I can just start by asking you how your monster fleshing out is going and how all of your AI attack. It's probably so far in the rearview mirror for you. But how would you say that the general monster stuff compares to First Voyage?
Well, in general, when we look at First Voyage, there's not really superficially a lot of changes at first for the existing creatures, but a lot of the internals have been improved somewhat. There's just basically been a lot of little changes all across the board that results in them being, slightly more responsive here, slightly more responsive there, a little more aggressive there, a little more aggressive here. And then all those little pieces kind of amalgamate into making the monsters. For example, one of the things I've been trying to fix is how they kind of stutter step when they chase you. There's still avoidance and crowd pathing that doesn't even work at all. That needs to be somehow figured out. But in terms of their willingness to actually immediately engage when they catch up to you, that's been improved. There's better strafing movement for all the Templar and stuff like that. The way that evasion in general and the step and the teleportation has been improved for a lot of these things. What you're going to see with the existing creatures is much more just general responsiveness and aggression as a result of that. Some of them, like the Magus, have been changed very significantly. There's still one thing I got to fix on the Magus I haven't tried to work on yet, which is his movement. When he decides to move, he has a tendency to just ignore you, kind of. So that will be something I haven't gotten to yet. The thing I was more interested in was fixing up his teleporting behavior, bringing in the other 3/4 of his skill set that he was missing. Because, as I said in the actual demonstrations, is that unit was just there just to have him there. He had basically nothing. Well, now he has a firewall ability that is quite dangerous, and that will be demoed. There will be a June demo video that will show a lot of stuff that I have not shown yet or talked too much about.
Okay.
And some of the things I have talked a little bit about internally, which will convey a little bit more about what I'm saying here. But with the existing creatures, it's just they'll be more polished and fleshed out. And as a result, you're going to expect the general difficulty to increase. Now, inverse to that is the fact the player's moveset has also been changed quite a bit, in the sense that everything is faster and more responsive. You have the movement canceling thing in now, where you can move out of every animation at about the same point after the damage window ends. So before it was inconsistent because the animation said different lengths, and it was basically a percentage of the animation length that you can move again. Now I have a system that detects when you're trying to put in inputs, and will give you back control when the actual damage portion ends. But then also dash canceling was put back in. There's more emphasis on mix-ups and switching between combos, and some of the existing combos are actually going to be reduced because we're kind of starting to move away from having longer combo strings in individual attacks and more into actually switching between stuff depending on how you demand it. And that's still in a volatile state, so I can't talk too much about that right now. Actually, one of the things I'll probably be working on this month is more or less fleshing out the new dual attack, which is a very different kind of moveset than everything else. So the player is more aggressive and the monsters are more aggressive. That's generally the feel of the difference you're going to feel compared to the first voyage and the existing content. When it comes to new content, then things are going to get a little more silly, because now with the first voyage, I had kind of established a ground level of like, this is demonstrable, this is not demonstrable. And the whole point of coming back to Arbiter after that was to start completing stuff. Now, unfortunately, there's this limitation of assets and animations. But we still have things like the Fire Magus getting more visibilities. His teleportation is much more aggressive now. He will try to get into your face and combo you. The firewalls and everything like that are quite a big deal. There's other units that I showed very briefly in the last demo. The Kijo, for example, she hasn't been worked on very much, but all the related systems around her have been improved, which is going to lead to some changes down the road. I don't know how much of that's going to get into the second voyage at this point, but the creatures I've added since then. So we had the Night Dweller Type 2, which was in the first voyage, but it didn't really do too much. In fact, I don't think its ability could even hit anything at that point. Okay. That unit has received a substantial chunk of improvement since then. Now it is much more functional. Still missing a lot of stuff. I don't know how to do the shadow charge and things like that. But one of the things I did manage to fix that's a pretty big game changer for these kinds of units is previously in their first voyage, when the Night Dweller Type 2, I think they had their spread attack in that, and it caused a lot of lag. It was really awful. And I discovered this was just due to the way the overlaps were not being turned off when they had collided with something, which in this case was themselves, because projectiles can collide with each other in this. I still need to find a way to more properly handle these spread attacks so they all don't self-collide, because that's still an issue. But let's put it this way. A unit spawning 20 projectiles and immediately collide with each other and explode basically has like no real lag to it at all, compared to before where spawning 3 projectiles caused a significant spike in lag. So that's been improved. So now he has two sweeping waves that he spams kind of inaccurately depending on where you were when you started attacking. He has a arcing fire projectile, also again fairly inaccurate, but they can spam it in addition to the existing cloud attack that he had prior as well. And then the teleportation and stuff is more aggressive. The unit is larger and more resistant to stagger. So I probably mentioned this in previous Big Boys tables when we were talking about this, but probably the biggest change beyond just the actual units themselves is the fact that you can't just stun lock them anymore.
Yes, yeah.
The stagger system is a little bit more sane. So that in general will change how you play against them. You have to be more... Basically, I wanted to keep dash canceling in because I felt more responsive, but I began to think of it as a way of, okay, so how do I make you have to actually play around this as opposed to be just something you use in a break like you do in most other games. And the key to that is just to make things more aggressive and make it a little bit more difficult to control them. So the Type 2 is definitely one that's kind of difficult to control. So you do have to be wary about him. Now we have something called the Type 3. And the Type 3 is a step up from the Type 2. And this is going to be one of the units I'm going to demo at the end of June. So basically my focus at this time is to make creatures, is to make opponents. And to kind of step in and change the other ones. There's a lot of stuff planned for Arbiter that never made it into the first voyage. And one of those things is the interaction of units that are aligned with Jormungandr and when night actually falls. The Iron Emperor warns you when you talk to him that when night falls, everything goes to shit really quick. And that is not something that really is conveyed in the game besides the actual state shift. Well, it was always planned that these creatures that are influenced by it, the wild plants and anything else, because there is no natural life left in any of these worlds. They're all just hellscape abominations that have been driven mad or otherwise consumed by these cosmic powers. And this one goes crazy when the night comes because its influence grows. So their movesets will change, they become more resistant, they gain new abilities, they become way more aggressive, stuff like that. The framework for that system is now in. So that will be something that we will see in the second voyage for sure.
Yeah.
And then we have stuff like the Type 3. So it was always intended that when you start seeing Type 2 spawning, that you have to exercise very, very high caution because it is a massive difficulty spike. They're very dangerous. They don't still represent that difficulty spike on their own for a variety of reasons. Again, they're missing certain engagement abilities I don't know how to create yet. But the Type 3, on the other hand, is not one that really depends a lot on engaging you like that. It is one that is a medium range unit. And it has one of the abilities I was hypothesizing about and thinking I probably wouldn't be able to do without something called actor pooling because of how badly projectiles were lagging when I spawned a lot of projectiles. Well, since we fixed that, I was like, we can actually try to do this now. So now we've done it. The Type 3 has our first prototype version of Dragon Breath, basically. So when you enter a game like Skyrim and you have dragons and they spit out huge streams of fire, you kind of expect it to behave like huge streams of fire, as in it goes around the terrain, maybe rolls around on the ground because it's liquid or whatever. But instead, it's just a big particle effect attached to a line trace collision with a cylinder or a box attached to it that just arbitrarily does damage sometimes. Well, I wanted to do it a little bit more like Dragon's Dogma, where the Dragon's Breath is actually a stream of damage that kind of interacts with the world around it. So something that basically I don't think any game has actually done. Mm-hmm. Well, I have that now. And it's not very advanced or anything, but it definitely works. And it really changes how you fight these units. They also have a whole ton of other shit. This is just, they have like 3 different breath attacks. That's just a small part of their kit. They have a lot of different things. Recently, as of yesterday, I implemented something called the Summoner Component, which is going to be a framework for how units manage things they spawn, or companions, for example. I'm thinking of like a captain and his guards, for example, could probably be governed through the system as well, since it's just a way of them communicating with each other, managing those various actors and stuff like that. That was created for this unit, so this unit actually spawns structures and keeps track of where it is on the map. So you may see it in these structures and try to pull it away from its structures. It will bring its structures with it when you pull it out of its camping zone, or when it wanders out of its camping zones. It will relocate its defenses, bring its defenses with it. So it's another thing that it does. There was a variety of things that were done with this unit that were just new, and ultimately it resulted in something that is just very lethal, actually. The Fire Breath does transformable damage, but if you get caught in it, depending on how you get caught in it, it can actually pretty much instantly kill you from full health. And it's quite avoidable and telegraphed. So I think the lethality is probably in a decent spot, but I haven't really run it through an actual major playtest yet. Mm-hmm. The fire does ambient damage, so you just don't want to be in the hot spots of the fire. It's quite easy to avoid when you see it. Things really change when you pair this unit with something that's more aggressive and wants to get more in your face, like the current Type 2. Actually, that pairing is very, very difficult to fight. And even I struggle a little bit with it. And that's kind of what I'm interested to see what people deal with, because these units have a lot of nuances to their behavior they did not have before. Their movesets are growing every single time I go to them. I change them quite a bit. I started working on units for La Vienna. We have the Wendigo, that if you stagger him and then stun him, he drops his weapons and changes his states completely. I'm hoping to have a system in where he can pick up his weapons afterwards. There will be different kinds of them, and their attack sets will change depending on what weapons they have. Mm-hmm. So normally they have an axe and a torch. The torch is actually a caster focus. If they just have the torch, they will only use caster abilities. If they have the axe and the torch, they mix between them. If they have their fists, they turn into fucking Kenshiro. And they also have some other special abilities they use as well. So they are a unit with a lot of complexity to them, just based on just what they have in their hands. And those are just very, very... Again, these are just zombies. They're just very simple, low-end units. The Wendigo is like the equivalent of the weeds from Arbiter, so it's just a very low-end basic unit. And it's going to have a lot of nuances to it. And what you can really expect to see probably out of Laviana is the units early on will be slower, beefier, and have a lot of different state changes. And those state changes really change how they interact with each other. So you start getting into compositional stuff. There's actually going to be healers in Laviana too that heal enemies. And you'll have to try to control them as well. And you kind of enter this stage where one of the things I kind of liked about Alice Madness Returns when I first got into it way back was that just the composition of stuff that you ran into changed how the fight played out a lot, and typically how you prioritize stuff in the fight. So there's always something I kind of kept an eye out when I was designing units in Apex X is, since we're going to have so many different units, we're definitely going to have units of different threats. You're never going to really be encountering a group of enemies where they're all about equivalent to one another. They may all be tier 1, but there's different, like, the Night Dweller Type 3 is still tier 1. And this thing possesses the ability to kill you head on if you eat its entire breath all at once. And really, like, what makes it tier 1 is the fact that this is easy to read, it's easy to avoid, you can use the terrain. But now you throw in the compositional challenges, and then a lot of that changes completely. So this brings us into the whole open environment thing. This is a unit that you're going to have to fight against using the terrain very differently than you do everything else. Most of the other units, you try to, if they're ranged, you try to get into a close space or get them into a close space. You don't want to fight this thing in a close space because the fire is going to bounce all over the goddamn place. It's going to make it impossible to do anything. And if you get that close space surrounded by its structures and other threats, it just will become unmanageable. And this unit tries to keep its distance from you. It doesn't like going into melee. Which means that it's also really fat, so it's not going to go into many small spaces anyways. Okay. So how you fight it's going to be completely different than how you fought a lot of this stuff at this point. So when I look at all that, and when I look at the monsters, one of the first things I think is, how are you going to try to fight it using the terrain? And how is the creature going to use the terrain? I'm nowhere near the state where I can have like spatial awareness on the unit so they can really read the terrain that well.
Yeah.
But this isn't going to be like Souls just due to the way I'm doing the nav mesh. They're not going to try to fit massive units into these holes because the nav mesh is not going to generate into them.
Sure.
So
that's probably like the biggest problem immediately neutered too, is that you don't have, like, the first time the player tries to pull something into a spot it can't fit or doesn't want to go or whatever. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's an
There's definitely improvements to be made with that. Like, I need the unit to be able to check when something is off the pathing mesh and then behave accordingly to that. But like for this unit, it would probably go back to its camp location if it has one that's not where it's currently at. But yeah, it's just like a general evolution of the current thing is what you can expect in the second voyage. The stuff does more things. The AI timings are tighter and a little bit more responsive. They'll be more likely to disengage when it makes sense. Like one of the main things is like initially a lot of the chances to step, evade, or teleport out were built into the attack chain in such a way where they had to be facing you to actually do these checks, which of course made no sense. So now that's running in a parallel to the facing aspect. So they may just do it like if you run behind, a lot of units will actually flat out try to disengage if you get behind them at all. If you get behind them, they're not going to try to turn and face you. They're going to try to do something to try to get away from you first. So that's like, you can just expect them just to feel a little bit more intelligent as a result of changes like that alone.
Yeah, because a lot of them were ranged or had some sort of utility when further away or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I'm definitely interested in the AI improvements and what you were talking about with regards to the fact that the compositions make the game really shine. Like you obviously gave the Alice Madness Returns example, and where the rubber meets the road in a lot of these games is what happens when, okay, I learned how this unit interacts and I learned how this unit interacts. You know, Unit A and Unit B, like obviously the two different types of weeds that are in the very first phase of Arbiter would be an example of this as a player. If I know how these two interact independently, I can start to think about how they might interact together. And then, I meet another enemy, and now I have to figure out how to slot that into the picture of like what these units want to do. And if they actually have things they want to do that are tangible to the player by their actions, that immediately starts to feel. I mean, like it's weird to say this in this context. I think for most people, they aren't going to see the connection immediately, but it does force you to be immersed because you have to immediately start considering what these entities want. And that means you're already thinking of them as agents that have their own ideas or desires.
Especially when you put terrain into the mix that they can navigate.
Yeah. And for their actions, basically, like what it comes down to in general, as far as I've seen, is that most of the time when you see something in any medium, there's a good chance that it's going to feel incidental. And if you watch a really good movie, or theoretically you play a very good game. I mean, like The Witness is an example of this. It's not an action game at all, obviously, but like everything is literally designed to be like exactly the way it is for the most part. Like, so I'm sure some things were not handpicked, but for the most part, like the entire world is crafted specifically to give you like certain environmental solutions if you stand at a certain position or whatever, and you can kind of notice these things if you get a keen eye. And that level of exploration, like the reason why it was a notable experience for me is because most games don't have that trait. Most games aren't going to try to actively, like change things about themselves, or most games aren't deliberate with the way that they design things. Like the closest you'll ever get to that is maybe, and this is sounding weird in the context because obviously I'm praising the idea of deliberate design. But the closest thing you get to deliberate design in most games is from lazy esports games that are just basically like hard coding the rules.
Or railed shooters, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Right, yeah. And it's like, in that context, okay, well, I can see that there was a deliberate design decision here, but like it was not because... It was not in service to some deep and rich world that's enjoyable to explore. It's because, we want to make sure that players don't do this one dumb thing in multiplayer. And that's not as interesting as naturally arriving at the location where players don't do stupid things, right? Which is a lot harder, but is much more, compelling to the average, to just like sit down and explore. And so to tie this back into the example of monsters, it's like the fact that things are deliberate, if you start to think about, okay, what if things are actually deliberate? And you said you're not at the stage of like spatial awareness yet, but if the AI do make decisions about their individual movements, if these entities, these agents do make decisions about where to go and how to get there and what moves to take and how to approach the player and all this other stuff based on the terrain, it does start to feel like, oh, well, that was a deliberate decision. Like, it wasn't just incidental. It was, they had a tactic that they were executing. Mm. And again, that does make them feel like genuine agents that really are trying to do something in the world that I need to respect in that sense, right? And so that's what immediately stands out to me as like an interesting and compelling idea, is like, what it, like basically the conditional, right? It's like, what if we do try to approach it from this standpoint? What if we are able to achieve something, crazy and earth-shattering and standard-breaking, and like, oh, wow, look, there are things that are actually deliberate. Like, when you were talking about the fire example, too, the Dragon's Breath, yeah, it's true. It's probably not that complicated or advanced as far as your initial implementation goes. But isn't it funny that we keep finding out that the thing that's not that advanced is still basically revolutionary compared to most games? Yeah. Like, it's a little sad when you look at it from that angle, but it's also quite empowering in the Smash sense that we might not be satisfied with the level of quality immediately, but we can immediately see how it is better than what everything came before. Like, as much as, okay, maybe there's a lot of things that are rough around the edges in Apex, you wouldn't want to go back to playing fucking God of War afterwards, right? Like, that's the point. So
yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't really casually play games anymore, really, except for some of these like Epic 7 where I play for PvP, and it's because it's like, I could play this mediocre game, or I could work on making an actual game.
Yes.
And that's generally been my mindset for a while now, is I'm starting to get to the point now where I feel like, I kind of have a shape in my head of where I can go, at least temporarily, to create something that will challenge me. Mm-hmm. And that's a good spot to be at, because it means I've come a long ways from, okay, we need to establish a core concept. We need to make it semi-functional. Need to get a semi-functional moveset in. I think the moveset's going to be still volatile for a long time, but I'm at the stage with it where I'm content enough that I can kind of pivot away from that and go back to making units. And there's still a lot of uncertainty about what I'm actually going to be able to do. If I make a second voyage, I think I'm going to have to cut probably like over half the things I wanted to do, simply because I just lost too much time in the first part of the year, and I'm still playing catch up from last year.
Okay.
So most of what I wanted to do is probably not going to make it in. And I don't expect the current production string to last too long. But we will hopefully still try to get to that point, like where I can feel like I have at least some portion in the project that I can say this is reflective of a chunk of challenging gameplay, and not because it's incidental.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
a lot of Arbiter is going to be seeing some structural changes just as a result of things like these conversations, reflection, conversations with other people, and kind of like hammering down really what I want. So, for example, some of the changes, the crow statues will be a little more obvious to find. They're going to be more heavily protected. And I'm sectioning off the first part of Arbiter with a green door, progression door. And the second part, I don't know what I'm going to do with yet, but it's going to be divided. What is presently into 3 parts, but there will be a 4th part, which is where I'm hoping we can get the actual boss into Arbiter that we wanted originally. And then I was going to push Schwa into the underground, but I realized after I did my structural changes, I can't actually really do that at the moment, so I'm not sure what the fuck I'm going to do. But we'll cross that bridge when you get there. I'm not doing too much mapping at the moment. The way I'm sectioning it is kind of like a lot of these objectives are something you're going to have to fight for to some extent. So a lot of the, like, obviously most of Arbiter is just incredibly unfinished in general, just otherwise flat out unpopulated. And there was going to be population that was going to be done later on the line. But there will be a more pointed effort towards actually making keys defended in many cases.
Ah, okay, yeah.
So, like, for example, within the first area, you can grab the initial blue key without any contest. There's nothing actually over there. That will be defended. The green key to get out will also be defended. And in such cases, there will also be, you basically have to kill something to actually get it to drop. And I don't have a system for that in, so it doesn't exist, but it will eventually. I mean, it was originally intended for the first voyage that you had to kill a fire magus to actually get the eggplant to drop or appear in the first place. I just didn't have a system in place for that, and I didn't have the time to actually put that together. So that's the kind of stuff we'll be looking for.
Oh, I thought that's actually what worked. I guess it was just there to begin with.
No,
I always
you still
assumed...
have to kill him.
Yeah.
You still have to kill him to actually trigger
right.
shit, but the key would actually have to... You'd actually have to kill him to actually physically get the key to appear to begin with.
Okay.
Otherwise, you might think you can just grab the key and run away from him, but that never actually triggers phase 2 if you do that.
Yeah, so that's probably what I was remembering then, because he was still a primary objective, basically.
Yeah. It's just, it wasn't quite the interaction I was looking for. So, basically, there was a huge discussion I have recorded on level design and a lot of this stuff. And I was going to do a demonstration of what I felt like might be a way of introducing some non-combat elements and stringing the world together. Like, basically, I was approaching the idea of what makes a good puzzle without making it require anything that you don't use in combat. And my idea was to create, like, Laviana was going to be governed in large part by a bouncing light puzzle. And one of the main things I was going to be talking about in this discussion was that having a bunch of small puzzles is terrible. Having one governing puzzle is a much better idea. That's something that governs the zone progression. So as opposed to something like Genshin Impact, where every 5 or 10 feet you have the exact same puzzle, just slightly retooled, or they've got a new quirk or some other bullshit. It's more like you just have one single primary objective that drives the zone forward, and then it feels more integral and important. This was based on the premise that one of the free assets we got early into the year was going to be something I could integrate into the project. It turns out that thing is incredibly badly performant. To spawn the lasers for it, he's creating and destroying actors on tech recursively for every bounce, and that is absolutely unacceptable. It works okay in his test map where you've got absolutely nothing going on and like 4 lasers tops. It's not going to work
Right.
in Laviana where we've got like 100 potential bounces or more across the whole zone.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that system works, but I could try to retool that system and get it to work for me. Or I'm going to have to try to make my own system. Whatever the case is, it's beyond my skill at the moment. I'm not even going to attempt it. So we're probably not going to have that in the second voyage. But that was kind of a showstopper for that whole discussion too, because it was like this was going to be a demo, and now I can't even do that. But we'll just cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. Laviana may not even make it into the second voyage as a result of that. I don't know. I wanted to have an escort thing within Platform 69. That was also a more linear map design where you have an allied cat, a mechanical cat, that is basically serving as a mechanism to hack your way through this dysfunctional station. So this was actually going to be a futuristic zone as opposed to all the others prior, which are more traditional, let's say. That's a very complex set of stuff that I don't have any groundwork set for even the smallest components of that at the moment. So I'll probably try to make some of the robots and other stuff we're going to have in that zone first. And then there's an AI system that I got to investigate that may or may not assist in building the framework for the companion, because it's going to be all objective oriented. But at times, of course, the problems with escort stuff is oftentimes you don't have control over your escorts. And you want them to do something or go somewhere to make your life easier. So one of the things you're going to be able to do in this is you're going to be able to get this unit to follow you around or go back to its original objective, or otherwise have some exertion over what it does or what its priorities are. So while I think I can govern this in the AI and I have an idea of how it would be done, it's still completely detached from every other thing I've ever done on the project to this point. I have no existing framework for it. I don't know how that's going to work, how the interaction would be done to begin with. It'll probably be a menu or something. Maybe you talk to it. I don't know yet. So that's it's kind of late in the year to be talking about something this massive, because it's on top of the fact I don't have the zone. I don't have any of the units in the zone. I have the other stuff I'm trying to do. And real life is still super labor intensive and really stress intensive. The claustrophobia is proving to be way harder to deal with than I thought. And I'm basically getting no sleep. And yeah, it's been rough. So chances are that doesn't even make it in either. So who knows what we'll actually end up with, if it'll reflect anything I'm talking about here. But at the end of the day, it would be nice to have something that at least the core combat fundamentals are exposed better than they were within the first voyage.
Yeah, I'm interested in talking a bit more about the puzzle stuff too, because obviously we've both played plenty of games where there's like basically 2 or more, often way more than 2, competing layers of game design where you're basically like, oh, playing a mini game within another game. Any RTS campaign comes to mind for this. But in the context of, doing something that's non-combat but still uses the combat skeleton as far as like the interactions go, I can see where that would be compelling. And I can also see that you were talking earlier about, the crow statues are going to be more obvious and things are going to be guarded. And to that degree, because there's, and there's not intended to be any limit for how far you can, see in the distance. You can maybe isolate areas of the map that you can just identify, oh, there's enemies over there. Maybe they're guarding something. Like, that kind of makes it more obvious anyway by default. Like, even if you didn't move the positions or change anything about the level design architecture, just the fact that there's enemies in that area that are, like, being protective of one area might indicate that there's something worth going over there. That does maybe make the game feel a little bit more on the linear side, because you're just going to follow the enemies or whatever, and that's your tactic as a player. But on the flip side, if they're basically, I don't think, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there's any spawners in Arbiter before the state switch. So what that would mean is you wouldn't see like an influx of enemies that repopulate the zone over time, or like you wouldn't see them, create patrols or whatever to try to hunt you down or something. Would any like macro level concepts of the AI even come into play later on in other worlds, or is that some like were you
Oh
even
yeah.
thinking about doing that?
Well, it's something I would like to do. I don't have a system for that at this stage, but as I continue to expand the AI functionality, it's always in my mind that I want there to be things like, say, for example, the wolves with an arbiter are supposed to have spawners. There is supposed to be like nests or growths in
Oh,
there that
okay, yeah,
spawn
yeah,
these things.
right.
I mean, with Autumn Wind, there was a wolf that literally spawned other wolves through mist. And it just created armies of wolves, just monsters through mist, because that's how they work. And but in this, there would be structures you could destroy, and they wouldn't be very aggressive spawners, and they would have active and inactive points. Generally, if you're attacking that area, they would become active,
Hmm.
or in phase 2, they would become active. So in Arbiter, there's going to be more emphasis on deciding, do you actually want to kill stuff in phase 1, or just try to ignore it as much as possible.
Yeah,
And with phase 2 becoming exponentially more dangerous than it is currently, ignoring stuff because of the fact that those creatures are going to become way more dangerous
right.
when they transform. But there's also that I want the Templar to be more active as well. Obviously, right now they just appear and then they kind of wander around, so they just end up wherever. A faction system also needs to be brought into play because they need to be defending themselves and fighting these other units.
Yeah, yeah, the free for all style of play or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Because I was gonna ask as a follow up whether or not there would be like, would you have the wolves attacking the Templar or what?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah. The Templar belong to an entity called the White. They're basically like ghosts, and the White is friend to no one, and nobody is friend to each other for the most part, except for the vestigial stars. Even though canonically some of these forces are technically on the same side because of events in Autumn Wind, and the fact this takes place a little bit after that, they're not really fully aligned in this. So as you are basically presented with the initial like the Iron Emperor basically says you might be able to turn them against each other, and there's definitely ways you can do that in this. But there's supposed to be a more ambient threat from some of these forces. I'm not sure I'm going to do yet. Like if anything touches the water, shit tends to go crazy because the water is technically the domain of an unrelated demon, and that's where the wolves and shit come from. So, but if you spawn it, really nasty things come from it, especially at nighttime. So there's supposed to be all these ambient elements that you can kind of weaponize at that point. But the Templar also would, like for example, if you bypass the main structure, there was supposed to be like a mini boss kind of thing within that second tower where the throne statue is, and nothing's
oh
actually
yeah,
in
yeah,
there
that's
currently.
right.
And the idea is that if you bypass the main structure and start attacking him, he actually calls for help. And he'll use like a horn or something, and all the Templar who hear it will come rushing over. There will be patrols over there. So they're supposed to be, the Templar are mostly supposed to be patrolling the area and otherwise guarding it. And if the patrols are allowed to call for help, then more will come. In phase 2, they would obviously change a lot where they don't really patrol as much anymore. They actually just kind of like guard the gates. So the area becomes a lot more heavily defended up front. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the final area for that yet. If we're going to keep the Gunnemer soldiers there, because they are part of that faction too, but I think they're going to be changed quite a bit. Not the whole area is probably going to be changed quite a bit. We'd also probably start seeing siege weapons and stuff there once I actually have some assets for that. And, other kinds of like more real garrison-y defenses. So absolutely you would start, in an ideal world, we would start seeing some of those start to take shape, at least fundamentally. I have a system in that should allow me to do the patrolling and other more like ambient objective stuff. Initially, my initial hope for it is just to put some patrolling robots and stuff within Zeus. Zeus is another level we're going to see a number of updates in. Just otherwise, starting to work on it. It's obviously really bare bones in the first voyage. Just not really too much in there, and most of it's walled off. Well, most of it's going to be walled off anyways. The Iron Emperor doesn't open up that much at start, but I'm hoping within the second voyage we can have Platform 69, which unlocks Tier 2 maps, and then the gallery opens up within the within Zeus. And the Iron Emperor will also at that point mention to you, yeah, Zeus can actually be attacked at any point. And these are our strategies if we get attacked and what you should do. There will be cases that this station can be attacked, and it can be based on what you do as well. So depending if you like attack, it's basically one of the other major changes I'm doing to the structure in this and the progression is I have not 100% but mostly decided that you will not be getting unlocks for any of your melee moveset. It'll be all fully unlocked right from the start. So that includes all the Sabbath Ragnaroks, dual attack, heavy attack, and any other alternatives I add. Unlocks would probably be the Great Bow, which you may get as soon as Tier 2, and those will come after the primary zones. So, for example, the primary unlock zones. So the way that I have it in my head right now, again, this could change a lot, but when you go into a tier, let's say you unlock Tier 2, ultimately, to complete the game, you have to reach the maximum tier, collect all the main memories, and then find the way out. And then you go into the final resolution arc, and then that's all linear. But prior to then, when you unlock a tier, you're given a set of zones. And each of those set of zones has a memory of conquest in it that you need to complete your memories. Which one you go into first will be your choice. But I decided that there will be those mandatory zones that you can do in any order. But there will be secondary zones as well, which do not contribute. Basically, you're trying to amass an amount of memories to unlock a zone. You may not need to do all of those at once. For example, in Tier 2, you may have 4 zones, let's say, 4 primary zones. You may only need 2 of those to actually progress to Tier 3. But it would be insinuated that when you do a major progression, you would get some kind of unlock. So let's say when you unlock Tier 2, you get the Great Bow. But you left Laviana or something else unfinished in Tier 1. You still need an amount of memories to get into Tier 3, but you could go back to Tier 1 a little bit more well-prepared and do some zones you struggled with in Tier 1. But the unlocks are not going to be... I don't know if we're even going to have 10 unlocks. Because I'm imagining there's going to be 10 tiers, and I don't know if we're even going to have 10 unlocks. So this is, again, very hyper-nebulous. But those optional zones, I figure we might have some optional zones that contribute towards macro-related stuff later on. So it was always insinuated you were going to have either companions or RTS-styled assets, particularly in later zones, or maybe in specific zones later down the line. And I started to think, why not tie those to the progression mechanisms, where you have to secure resources that can be used to build these assets or improve these assets later down the line. So, for example, if the map to transition from Tier 2 to Tier 3 would make use of these assets that you've otherwise acquired in Tier 2, but you don't want to bother going through those zones, or you're trying to speedrun it or something, you would ignore those zones and then take on a much harder map because you have less assets to work with. Or you could do those, secure the assets beforehand, and then have more things to work with or have helping you within that transition. That's one idea currently. So, presently not sure. But also, they would also contribute to the defense of Zeus as well. So, in defense situations, having more resources means more weapons defending it, more allied units, stuff like that. So,
basically, you can make your life easier in the longer term for any invasions or whatever.
So it's one idea.
Yeah.
The thing about this is that there is friendly fire in this for you to enemies, or you to allies, but probably not allies to you, because that's kind of harder to control, might feel kind of bad. But you can actually end up failing objectives by killing allies. So I thought about that for a while, and I thought, yeah, I think you should have to control where you're swinging stuff. You have to be precise. So I don't see why this wouldn't be any different. Enemies can usually harm themselves too, unless it's elementally aligned weapons that they're otherwise immune to, like shadow demons won't harm other shadow demons with shadow attacks. But if, for example, something throws a fireball and hits a bunch of dudes that are not immune to fire otherwise, they're going to take damage from it. Why would you and allied assets be too much different?
Right.
So
even if like a Void Hound takes a swing and hits another Void Hound, it's still going to hit him, right? So.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea, is that, I just think back to things that are silly in other games where, like, for example, in Dumb Eternal and Dumb Re-Dumb, you have the infighting that they took from the original Dooms, but they don't actually do anything. It's just animations.
Yeah, they don't take actual damage, which is like
Yeah, they're not
completely
capable
ridiculous.
of hurting each other.
Yeah.
They make blood and make sounds. Like, you can't have one or the other. If enemies can't hurt each other, they can't be attacking each other. They can't be making blood and get hit sounds. Because that just gives you completely false reads, right?
Well, it's not just false reads. It's also the fact that, like, it's not even something, like, I guess it's an additional component of the false read. In the original Doom, if you just happened to walk in such a way that, like, a melee unit stood in front of a fireball from somebody else, they would start infighting, depending on some of their circumstances. Like, it's not that simple, but that would be one way that you could do to deliberately, like, make your enemies start fighting each other. And in the new games, they don't have the function of dynamic infighting. It's all pre-designed. So it's basically like you walk into an area and these enemies are already shooting each other. It's not you walk into an area and provoke the enemies in such a way that makes them shoot each other. There's no dynamic way you can even start that. So it's like they took this component of what was a genuine mechanic and system within the previous games, and they just made it so that, this time around we can just make it a cinematic moment that has no gameplay context. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, though? So, yeah, it's really dumb.
Inciting infighting is definitely something I want to be possible between factions in this.
Yeah.
In Arbiter, it was always imagined that if the Templar are too well fortified, you just get someone else involved with them.
Yeah, you maybe try to throw the wolves at them or something.
Wolves, weeds. Yeah. In Phase 2, like, then you just drag fucking Night Dwellers into their place. So, you're playing basically the incarnation of the concept of war. So the whole idea is that you win through any means.
Right. And I suppose one of the things that is a component of that is you get to, since you've positioned things like the Phase 2 tripwire, so to speak, you can do that without going into the Templar area, theoretically. Well, I guess you need the crow statues for that. So
you do need the crow statue, and the third one will be in their area, but you don't have to go through the whole castle to get to it.
Yeah. So you can kind of
just the main structure.
Once you identify where, and maybe that's another reason to identify, like, more easily identify where the crow statues are, is that if you didn't know where it was, and the Templar stuff ends up getting fortified. But basically, it sounds like you're trying to avoid running into situations where the game is not winnable or well, I guess it would always technically be winnable if you, like, grind out the victories against the Templar or whatever. But the idea would be, for the average players just starting, they might not have the same level. But I guess you don't really care too much about that. Like, it's just like, if you're not good enough, then get good enough.
The Type 3 is going to be an Arbiter, and this is a unit that's going to require you to have pretty significant spatial awareness, where you're going to be relying a lot on your hearing.
Yeah.
You're going to have to keep, especially when you've got groups of these units fighting, you always have to know what the Type 3 is doing. Because if you don't, then you're going to get swamped. And other bad things can happen. And these units are jumping and teleporting around and shooting fire all over the place. So if you get to the stage where you're in Phase 2 fighting these, I'm just expecting that you are capable of handling this. If not, then you're going to have to learn how to handle it.
Yeah.
And I think everybody, like, what interests me about this is I think everybody's going to have their own different ways of dealing with this.
Oh, yeah, sure.
A lot of people are probably going to try to run away from them, so I'm going to try to make sure that they can chase you, engage you across long distances, or otherwise hold areas that are important that make you have to come to them.
Yeah.
I'm going to be changing the way that the Phase 2 Summoner handles quite a bit. And...
oh, yeah, that's another thing, too, is that I remember having the sensation in the first voyage that if I deliberately avoided, like, killing off the summoner stuff, it got out of hand pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's even possible to negate by, like, because I think the Templar do fight the Void guys, but they were usually wiped out by the time.
No, they don't. They don't currently.
They don't.
There's no faction stuff in right now. That's definitely a very complex thing that I'm not sure how to get into yet. Plus, I don't really want to quite get into the faction stuff yet until I have a way to actually control where they're wandering around.
Right.
Because otherwise, basically, like, half the units in the map will be dead before you even get past the first area, no matter how fast you go through it. Yeah. So there's two pieces to that puzzle I have to figure out. I'm hoping, like, basically I'm kind of doing it kind of lockstep right now, where I want a bunch of units done. Yeah. So I preferably don't have to go back to them too much. Other than the bosses and stuff like that. I've got one mini boss I started work on. and Schwa is still missing like half of her moveset. And there was Korodai that I'll probably put in for Arbiter, or at least hope to. That he had like a lot of his framework basically got cannibalized for other stuff, but he's still there. He still exists. He can be worked on. So once those are at a stage where I'm pretty comfortable populating maps, I don't have to go back and forth.
Yeah.
Then I'm probably going to start looking at integrating this AI system that will be used for the patrol points and stuff like that. And once I get that integrated and I have examples of that integrated, then I can go back to Arbiter and be like, okay, how do I make the Templar stay in this place, leash back after they're done fighting stuff or engaging things? And then we start thinking about the wolves actually holding an area, and then the weeds holding an area, and then we talk about factions. So then the factions will be very much at that. And then after we got factions, and then we might think about, okay, so then we don't want full leashing behavior. What if we want enemies to actually call in for help? So let me start talking about actual faction interactions and stuff like that. It's definitely it's a simple thing in many ways, because all you really need is a way to sort by tags. And if this is this tag and I am this, then I'll pick this as a target. But when you enter group combat in a lot of these games, it turns into a clusterfuck where they don't prioritize targets very well. Like, I mean, just look at CMBW, where you could have issues with target parties where if melee units get hit by ranged units, they latch onto them and then ignore the melee units in front of them, and then they spin.
Yeah, that's not been a problem for months.
But yeah, well, it definitely was a problem way back.
It wasn't due to target priority. It was just due to the fact that they didn't reset.
Well, it was due to them not resetting their target at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's an issue that you see a lot within ARPGs too, because they're using the exact same kind of systems where they're not really like aware of units hitting them. They don't really target switch very reliably at all.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you should have target priorities where like they do try to go for the ranged units unless they can't reach them. Like, how do you handle all this? So that's all the questions I have to answer. Is I have to basically walk down that same path. I'm probably going to have the exact same problem CMBW did way back, and I'm going to have to solve them in probably very different ways. And I just don't want them to always just focus on things just because, oh, you hit me, so now I'm going to attack you, because then now you're going to be just constantly spinning back and forth too, right? So it's I have to wrap my head around how I'm going to do that, and then how I'm actually going to implement how I'm going to do it. So there's a lot of like, I probably spent like 5 or 6 hours yesterday just kind of sitting here staring at this and being like, what zones am I even going to try to do?
Right.
Because it's pretty obvious Rangoro is going to be too big to get done, and we're probably not going to have an actual tier 2 zone. Laviana may have half of the zone. Arbiter probably is not going to change too much. Like, it probably won't have new areas added to it. Platform 69 should probably be a priority, but I don't have any of the systems, and I need to even begin structuring it. So it's best just to sit back, make the actual content first, and then think about the zones and then the AI. So I absolutely want to do a lot of that stuff.
Right.
Not sure how much of any of it's going to make it into a second voyage. I may end up not even releasing a second voyage if I don't reach a stage where I feel like it's worth pushing it out.
And that's just something that hopefully for everybody involved, you do end up being able to maintain something of the smash streak that has been occurring.
Yeah.
Obviously,
made good progress in the last month, but need to work faster for sure.
Need more months like this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, it's definitely a big topic for sure. The whole like faction related stuff. I'm a big fan of the idea that like, you have this interplay and this the world feels a lot more alive, and when the world, like members of the world, are engaging with each other, right? So that's kind of a no-brainer, but it's still important to note and to try to take to heart as a designer and figure out ways to make that manifest without it being really, overtuned or whatever. So I'm looking forward to seeing whatever you're able to come up with in that department, even though that particular move is a bit further away. And what I've been focusing on my side lately has been a campaign. You've known a little bit about that so far, but one of the things that I was recently, so we're going back to the earlier topic of like things that are deliberate versus things that are incidental. Obviously, and you you haven't played a lot of custom campaigns, but
No.
You would still be able to.
I got black pilled on those very quick.
Yeah, you would still be able to agree with this, that most of the dialogue in these campaigns, custom or otherwise, is like, okay, maybe it does one thing, but it's very incidental with a lot of other things. So what I mean by this is maybe it says this character is like this or wants this, or maybe it says this thing is happening or this faction is doing this or whatever, right? But it's very rare that it does anything else. It doesn't, like, so an example for this would be like, does it feel like individual characters have like a unique way of phrasing their dialogue, have their own voice, or are they all just mouthpieces for whatever the writer wanted to achieve in that moment? And usually it's the latter, where characters don't actually sound like they are different, or if they are different, it's very superficial. You think of like the way that any of the Protoss talk in StarCraft 2 or whatever. It's all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And it's not even really that different than the Terrans. They just happen to like phrase their, like use slightly different word choice, which is like a start, but it's not the whole thing. Because like theoretically they would also just think fundamentally differently, but instead they're just like, actually, Amon is the biggest bad and whatever. So it's all the same. Now, one of the things that I was looking through here is I have a character that I was trying to make sure to write the character in a way that is like, so basically the conceit here is that he doesn't know that his the communication line has been tapped by the players faction, and he's like the governor. He's the guy who's supposed to be the man in charge of the regional defense force as there's an uprising going on, and he's trying to like compose himself or whatever, but when he hears that the rebels are still active in an area that he thought he had shut them down, he kind of like panics a little bit, because the concept there is the subtext is he might lose his position as governor if like the high command ends up having to come down here and deal with this shit. So he's very much not happy with the situation, and he makes that clear in his dialogue line. And then he composes himself to address them more directly through like the PA system of the city or whatever. And the whiplash, the tonal whiplash of that is like, that's not really that complicated. I'm not trying to say like, wow, look at my great writing. It's just like, just having like such a difference is like in any other campaign, it would just be like, why did they do that though? Like it's like all the other StarCraft custom campaigns have like such shit writing all the time that if a character sounds like they have a different voice from one dialogue line to another, and I'm not even talking about audio because usually there is no voice acting for this shit, but just in terms of the way that it's written, you just think it was a mistake or an oversight. Like you wouldn't think it was deliberate. It was just incidental. And so I've had to like almost deprogram myself from the AIDS defaults that you get from dialogue. I'm sure you've had your own fair share of like analyzing dialogue, especially in an RTS context, but in general, it's like another thing I was thinking of is for this exact dialogue event where this thing happens, there's like 6 or 7 lines. A lot of them are just like one word. Like one of them says contact when they make contact with the enemy. And that's like what kicks things off. And then there's like a short response afterwards. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't like overloading the player with dialogue, because that's what happens in all these other shitty things is either there's like very little dialogue in the custom campaigns, or in StarCraft 2 it's like dialogue every 30 seconds to distract you from the fact that everything is horrible and pointless and boring. And I didn't want to go down either one of those roads, but if I had to edge towards one, I would probably do the minimal side, because well, you're busy focusing on a game, and so like anything that's there should be terse and kind of like to the point. Now, thankfully, this event happens like fairly early on before any significant attacks have been marshaled, because it's basically a response to the enemy scouting you. But it's still one of those things that like I wanted to make sure it wasn't too long in general. And so, yeah, I don't know if anything I said here triggers any thoughts for you on the dialogue front or the character writing front, but it's definitely one of those things where I'm thinking to myself, like, it would be really good if we had more examples of character writing that was actually, nuanced and deliberate, like deliberately different in whatever ways it was different, instead of all that shit being incidental. Because having gone back and listened or watched some campaign playthroughs recently and like just seen what else is out there and having a general knowledge as well of like what is out there, it's not very good. It's a lot of like, very bare bones stuff where even analyzing it with this in mind immediately makes you feel like, well, I'm giving this product or project way more credit than it actually deserves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, dialogue and character is something I've taken seriously for a very long time. So I've been writing for a very long time.
Right.
With voice acting, it was more challenging because I've just done unit voicing for a long time. I didn't make campaigns.
Right. Yeah.
And that kind of changed in the beginning of 2010 when I started building concepts for campaigns for StarCraft 2. And I started writing out scripts much more in depth than anything I'd written out before and doing voicing for those, testing them. I even had you do some of those when I was more confident, hoping that we would actually get somewhere with them. And then, of course, we had the Retribution audiobook, radio play thing, which was the most major attempt I had ever done to build something like that. And it was also, I had experience making audio-only productions, but this was the first time I was really building one for public consumption.
Right.
And it was really like first serious one. It was difficult. It was very difficult because I pretty much had to do all the voices. And I knew what I wanted, but actually obtaining that was turned out to be too difficult for me.
Yes.
Because most of the voices I need were older voices, and I couldn't pull the age. I could pull the diction, I couldn't pull the age at all. And then I reached this point where I had 3 very major characters, and they all kind of sounded very similar. So the way to make them different was really, I couldn't post-process them too much because they weren't like Protoss or whatever.
Right, yeah.
They were like lizard men, right? So they still sounded pretty much like people. And I had to basically segregate them in how they spoke, in the diction of how they spoke, in their mood. Mm-hmm. And now we come to Apex X, where we're crossing this bridge again. But the challenges are a little different. So while Apex X doesn't have too many characters in it that you're going to be talking to for the most part, because your character does not speak, which is one of the things that you're going to be exploring in this, is the hows and the whys. Mm-hmm. And the character is going to be doing the bulk of the dialogue in the game is going to be the Iron Emperor. Now, the Iron Emperor was basically a human who he basically had very humble beginnings, but he got into the underground, he got into drug trades, he got into a lot of research, he got into like voodoo, and he learned a lot about kind of like I was gonna say medicinals, but it's not really the same thing. It's sort of things, kind of like chemistry and herbology and stuff like that. Humans lose their immortality at the end of the 3 kingdoms, but he maintains his immortality. He becomes immortal. But then immediately after this, we enter the situation that begins Apex X, which is him and the Horsemen of War and then a bunch of other shit kind of gets stuck in this. It's called fractal motion, which was actually created by another horseman. An unintended effect of this was that there was another interaction going on that led to the creation of the White, which again created the Templar. They created like this pocket, the shadow worlds, this sort of quantum hole, this reflection of the real world that was real but not quite real, and it kept repeating itself over and over and over again. And the Iron Emperor, being kind of the epicenter of that, was always aware of these repetitions. And at the end, it would go on for a set amount of time, and then it would destabilize and then restart over. And the destabilization would get worse in each and every single time. And as it goes on, and as you get into this and you learn about it, it's actually because of the influence of the cosmic horrors that they're trying to take advantage of the stuff that's going on to attack the divine presences that are in here, which would be the horsemen. Yeah, Iron Emperor is just kind of caught in this. He doesn't really understand any of that that's going on. But you as the player character are technically that force, but you don't remember it, and you don't really communicate about it either. So much of your exposure and introduction to this really wacky environment is through the lens of the Iron Emperor kind of monologuing at you, because he's kind of dug your character up every single time that this repetition has happened and tried to use your vast power to influence events in the world, to gain control of the world, learn more about what's happening, and then try to get out of the situation. But at the same time, we are talking about each of these repetitions going on for like 20, 30,000 years. This guy's been at this for a very, very, very long time. And he has a personality that doesn't exist in any conventional writing as a result of that. You can't even begin to imagine what this kind of person would actually be like, having to go through this over and over and over again. But I kind of imagine him as having a personality. Well, you could almost see him almost as a self-insert, because almost all characters are a self-insert of a writer to an extent. But Apex X is kind of a reflection, in some sense, of my own life and the own insanity I've gone through and how I've tried to deal with it. So the Iron Emperor kind of, in many ways, reflects how I've tried to deal with all the lunacy I've had to deal with, especially in the last 10 years. But at the same time, that's how we introduced to this, where he has a very, like, cynical, seemingly carefree, but still, like, very annoyed and very, like, exhausted personality. But then we get into this, which is the final cycle, because the whole thing has all fallen apart long ago, and the Cosmic Chorus have just about succeeded in achieving their goals at this stage. And then this is when the secrets of that, the reality of that, finally begins to hit this guy. What's actually going on? What's responsible? And that getting out of it is actually not going to be nearly as easy as he had hoped. And when you start Apex X, when you first talk to the Iron Emperor in this, he doesn't even really mention much of this. He, like, offhanded, like, if you go to the dialogue where you talk about the world and stuff at play, he kind of just waves it off as like, yeah, shit's bad, just fucking kill all of them. Because that's kind of like how he's approached all at this point. It's just like, I have a weapon, you go out there, you kill everything, everything's good, we make some progress. But then at this stage, when you started this, you've already reached the point where at this stage, this whole setting would have reset a long ago, and he's realized, wait, something is obviously very different. Something is really different. The shit's getting worse and worse. Pretty much all life is gone now. It's just us and all these things that I don't know where the hell they even came from, because they weren't here before. And most of his fleet's gone. Most of his forces are gone. He doesn't have too much left. And the character, the Horseman, has lost pretty much all of her memories at this stage. And he had to do some really psychotic shit to get her to manifest again to begin with. And it's quite clear her power is only like a fraction of what it should be. And things are just really fucked up. And then, so now, he enters a situation where he used to be really comfortable in before. He was really comfortable just having you just march off and kill however many millions of people to get this stage. Because, you know, when we talk about the Apex StarCraft campaigns, that's what this was. Is that's basically, you would go through this, but it was a different lens of the perspective, where he leveraged the immense mental acuity of this character to take control of massive amounts of clones and drones and forces. And that was how the RTS perspective was justified. That's how the whole concept of controlling units was justified. Because normally, when you go into something like StarCraft, it's like you're like a commander or a captain, whatever, and you're issuing orders. You have this lens, this suspension of disbelief, which is the whole command interface of you pushing buttons and shit. We actually justified the existence of that every single time we went to any of my campaigns. I went to great lengths to justify the process in which you're actually interacting with things and seeing them. I would always justify that as being a part of an actual neural interface, a translator that translated your mental signals, your brain, your sight, your everything, into some kind of machine interface that then transmitted that into actual events that happen interacting with other stuff on the battlefield. So, like, for example, if you are connected to this command center or this nexus, you know, how is it that you cannot see stuff that's happening on another planet? What is stopping you from, like the Protoss are psychic, right? They're plants that have mind powers. You know, the frogs are gay. So why can't they just see or interact with stuff that's on an adjacent moon, that's in orbit? Why does stuff happen that keeps surprising them and catching them off guard? It doesn't make any sense in the writing whatsoever.
Oh yeah, sure. No,
right?
none of the characterization for that makes any sense. They are supposed to be able to share thoughts with each other too, and yet they regularly make mistakes.
You can't even escape their thoughts. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Like
like
that's
they're
supposed to be
because they're
even
part
in
of
the
the kara.
cornerstone of them.
Yeah, but the
Yeah.
entire point of the reason why Aldaris goes on his stupid crusade while Ire is getting attacked by Zerg, by the way, is because he he misunderstands Tassadar, which shouldn't be possible with their fucking setup. So.
Yeah, and then the whole thing, of course, with Aemon, the dark voice. As always, Sever in Nerdcore is like the Dark Templar, so he can't invade our thoughts, and somehow he was just conveniently unable to do so for all this time until now, anyways, amongst a million other things. And like these are the questions I try to answer before I get into even beginning to do mission design or even writing dialogue. Is like, how does this stuff work? So that's how I justify the RTS perspective in Apex was, and why you were exceptional as well. Like why this and all this and that was necessary and how all this stuff works. So I always, having a good writing depends very heavily on a technical foundation. The technical foundation needs to make sense when you ask basic questions like this. Nothing Blizzard's ever made withstands even the most basic fundamental questions at all. There's probably a lot of questions that would probably unravel a lot of Apex too, which is why I'm constantly asking those questions, right?
Right.
So then, but in the backdrop of Apex X, we have all that's already happened, and it's been happening. And it's been happening constantly. So the Iron Emperor is just kind of like used to all of this. But then things happen that he's not used to. And we kind of enter the same situation you were talking about, where you had someone who is fairly calm and comfortable about something, and then things start to change that is not. And then that personality has to start exposing traits of itself that aren't very obvious otherwise. And then you go from calm and collected to shit's really bad, how do I deal with it? And then maybe the way that you try to deal with it doesn't even work to begin with. And then things continue to get worse and worse. That is basically what happens in Apex X. Is Iron Emperor, when he gives you the mission for Platform 69, to him, it's just him dishing out orders for the millionth time to you. He's accustomed to you not saying anything, etc., etc. He just kind of rambles and says, okay, you know what to do. Right? We're here for resources. You know the drill. Protect this, kill that. Call it the end of the day. But part of the link that they share is that he starts experiencing her memories, all the other stuff that happened, because the Horsemen, initially when they were created, marched off and killed all the humans in the Three Kingdoms. They just walked in and they slaughtered everyone, with the exception of Pestilence, who went north. Glacio was already burning anyways. He just kind of turned around and walked back. Everyone was already dead for unrelated reasons. But the Horsemen of War in particularly kills a lot. And it's really bloody fighting. And the Iron Emperor, is not accustomed to killing people with his own hands. He's accustomed to being completely detached from the whole process. And being like, here's my army of drones. I'm going to glass this planet. It doesn't fucking matter. They're all going to be back in the next rotation anyways. Right? Like, the whole concept of killing to him at that point is just comical. He doesn't even think about it. But then, as going through all these experiences and unraveling all this stuff, he starts asking what is real and what isn't. Is this pocket reality a dream? Is it imaginary? Or is it really real? How many people have I killed? You know, how many did these people live real lives? Am I real? Are you real? Is anything that's happened, does it even matter? And then you start like readdressing all these questions all over again. The whole concept of his life, his reality, and everything around him completely comes apart over and over as you progress through this. Because basically, the progression for this is you start in Zeus. And Zeus is like on the far outskirts outside of the galaxy. But you need to get to the Fragments of Conquest. But in order to get to the Fragments of Conquest, you have to map out the area and get into increasingly twisted, fucked up places, because the whole thing is kind of falling apart, to find the fragments that are buried deep in places that the sensors can't normally detect because they just don't know how to. The physics and everything's just kind of falling apart at that point. So you're constantly like looking for resources, and he's relying on your memories to map out these places to find his way through shit that he doesn't understand. So the deeper you go, the more psychotic things get, the more unhinged and unraveled things get. Zones will look normal and believable, like Arbiter or La Vienna at tier 1. When you start hitting tier 2 and then tier 3, things are going to get more and more kind of strange. And when you start getting into later tiers, it's just going to be all manners of hell. It's just things are going to be twisted beyond belief. The things you're going to encounter are going to be unimaginable. And of course, the way that they fight is also going to be strange, and that the way you navigate levels is going to be strange. And the way that things look and sound is going to be strange. So you have to write a character who you are experiencing through third person, going through the motions of experiencing this, while the player character is sort of indifferent. But at the same time, there will probably be some interactions. I'm thinking of having the other horsemen communicate to you at some point, because they would try to intervene, or at least help you, where they will make commentary that will also set the backdrop for this, where by the end of Apex X, you basically watch most of everything go insane. How do you portray that in the character and the writing? So that's like the challenge that I face with that, because it's not like going to be one mission briefing where we have a guy that kind of alternates between this and that and then addressing things. This is something that's going to take place across the entire game. So there's a lot of nuances you have to think about how this is going to be portrayed, not just in the actual writing for the dialogue, but how the dialogue is actually spoken and when it is spoken. For example, when you first start, the Iron Emperor is very much to the point when any of the subjects are brought up about, again, like the stuff that's going on, the enemies you fight, or the state of the fleet, or Zeus, or whatever.
Yeah.
He's very dismissive about it. He's very like, yeah, things are kind of bad. Shit happened. Don't worry about it. Just do your job. And then as we go later into the dialogue, into later zones, when things are very clearly not going well, and things are just unhinging, and then all these questions are being asked, then the actual, like, the same subjects being reapproached will absolutely not be approached in the same way or the same lens at all. Right? And then that's when you can actually start to learn about, like, the history. It's basically, when I look at the writing for this, the world for this and the characters are massive and sort of somewhat impenetrable, because there's too much scale, there's too many things that have happened.
Yeah.
And you don't want to thrust any of that onto the player, especially at the very start of the game. And now you can go, I'm figuring you can go through the entire game without really experiencing any of the dialogue at all, because you actually have to kind of go into the dialogue and look through it. Or, you know, there's like the database of like the gallery will have, there's NatCom is the AI interface for Zeus, which basically would have like a summary of the stuff you've already encountered.
Yeah, and so you can choose
whether
like
like the Templar or the Ways or whatever. Yeah. So you can choose to get into that. The memory fragments from Conquest as well will also experience a little bit. But yeah, at the same time, it's like to get into it, you have to progress into the game world. And then you can start to put pieces together. So how that stuff is exposed and when and where is it exposed makes a really big difference. Like to even learn about his history or the repetition part in general, that you've been here before. He like offhandedly mentions it, but doesn't elaborate until later on, because he doesn't feel it's even important to even bring up at this point.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, it's a really big subject.
It is, but it's also, I would just dial us all the way back and say most games and most dialogue in general, it doesn't even sound good when it's not something cosmic and epic and insanely large scale. Like you can't.
It doesn't sound believable.
Yeah, like you can look at anything from StarCraft 2, and I mean from the writing to the intonation of the delivery of the voice acting and stuff. It's like I remember my first. I didn't have Heart of the Swarm when you did your playthrough. And when I saw that there was the opening mission was like some weird micro shit where you were like progressing, you were point and clicking through a facility.
Oh,
and
God.
There was like
you
a
had to remind me of
Umojan.
that.
Yeah, there's a Umojan Marine that's like, we could use, like, I don't know. He says some line where he's like, you know, the facility's exploding. People are trying to be evacuated. There's lots of dead people everywhere. Dominion are invading with drop pods that are flying through the fucking ceiling of the place or whatever. And this guy's just like, this is bad or something, you know, like he just doesn't have he doesn't sound like he's actually in that moment. Yeah. Right. And so that's something that you mentioned in your playthrough anyway, is like none of these people sound like they're actually, you know, in trouble or whatever. And part of that is going to be like the voice coaching and the voice acting, but it's also, I feel like even if you stripped away, like even you could salvage a bad script with a good voice actor, but the script itself also needs to deliver something that makes sense. Like, if these guys are meant to be, you know, more useful or individually significant than the rank and file Dominion soldiers, maybe they shouldn't be the ones saying something like that. Maybe they should just immediately be commanding and saying like, you know, we have this plan, we were doing this, and then you would discern based on that that like they're cool under pressure, or they already had a plan for this, or they prepared for this, or whatever. And even though they might have been caught off guard initially, they like can sort of mount some sort of counterattack, or they can at the very least like do something to evacuate people or whatever, right? Like that would immediately just having them matter of factly, perhaps. But still in an alert sense with regards to the intonation, deliver more commanding lines or more responsive lines and less about observational, like looking at how bad this is. You don't need to do that because like we can already infer if the setting is taken seriously that the situation is bad just by looking around and seeing the exploding facility and stuff. But then if we see a guy, instead of sort of like reinforcing that through dialogue in a lazy way that's basically telling the player, isn't this so bad? If they instead are like, hey, dude, we've got a plan. We're gonna go to the plan and stick to it, and it's gonna help us. Like, okay, well, at least there's like competence within this military and confidence within what they've got, and you don't even get that level of characterization out of most games. So that's sort of where when I'm thinking of something much more on the like mundane side of things compared to what you were talking about, I'm just thinking of like, oh, there's an uprising. They're fed up with the way that things are. But I even put. Like, I was even thinking, like, okay, well, you don't want to paint the hostile military here that's, like, taken, like, the Imperium, as I'm calling it, the Orion Imperium. You don't want them to be, like, these guys are, just terrible and evil and cartoon villains. Like, you want them to be, like, this particular governor is maybe lax or in the pocket of the, big guys or something that are, like the business magnates and stuff, and that's what's actually happened in this particular colony. But like, if you don't have this big protective military, and what happens if Zerg rock up, or what happens if some other faction decides to raid you or something, like you actually kind of need some, like you get some value from being under the heel of these people, so to speak. Even though there's some negatives to it, like you also have some protection. So like you have to trade that off, and that has to be referenced for like what, like maybe there's going to be some dialogue later on that's like, we can, like we've shown that we can protect ourselves, like we're fighting back against these guys as just a militia force, like we can do stuff. And then there's also like, is that even believable that a militia force would be able to fight back against the Imperium despite them deploying one of their some of their platforms down? Like, okay, well, here's how we explain that. Now there's like an agent provocateur benefactor character that's like feeding them technology and resources that is operating as like a shadow agent of another government, another nation that's like a rival to the Imperium but can't stand to them more directly, so they have to do these like shadow ops in order to find any value. And like, well, that stuff exists as like the impetus for this whole motion that sets all of these actions into motion. But is it important that like, faction A or faction B is like hostile to this faction and you need to know all the history? Not really. Like you can just sort of intuit that. It's like there's going to be some references to this benefactor character, and then he maybe shows up in the second missions briefing or something and like communicates to you or whatever. And it's like, great. Like, okay, we have this character, and maybe, there's some deep, interesting things that you can do there with his dialogue that are kind of there's mystique around it or something, but it doesn't have to be. Like, I don't know. I feel like at the same time as all of these companies do a horrible job with even the basic stuff, they also, like, don't even bother trying to keep things simple either. So, like, they don't ask the basic questions that result in the unraveling of everything. Like you were giving the example of the Protoss earlier. Like, they don't ask the basic questions that, if you did ask them, would force you to recontextualize or change some aspects of your writing. But they also, like, go for the highest concept shit, like Kerrigan transforming into a chicken or whatever the fuck happens at the end of StarCraft 2. It's like I don't understand why you would even bother going for like cosmic galactic ending shit if you can't even write like a generic uprising plot. You know what I mean? So like there's a lot of things, like the plot of Star Wars, the original Star Wars, is not that complicated. And in fact, one of the reasons why it works as well as it does is the simplicity. And it doesn't, like, if you did ask a lot of questions about the setting, you'd get a lot of silly answers. And so it doesn't even bother, like, lingering on those or, like, exploring those. Like, the prequels talked about fucking midichlorians and tried to explain the Force scientifically, and it all became stupid, not just because part of the allure was the mystique, but also because that's a stupid explanation and doesn't even make sense, like, in terms of rules. So it just creates all of these really ugly, like, issues and conflicts with the original lore. And so you have like examples like that where they go for the high concept explanation, like we're going to explain everything as if that's actually what people want. It's more like we've said this time and time again. It's more important that the writer knows the details than the player knows the details. The player doesn't need to know the details, like in many respects. The audience doesn't need to know all of the details. As long as the author knows it and can like use that correctly and doesn't forget those important details while they're writing other scenes, then the context will make sense, and that's like the important part, right? So it's just like if I'm a little frustrated that most people don't seem to give a shit about actually writing dialogue, interesting characters, basic situations that work, and then they just go for this like at the end of StarCraft 1, Tassadar randomly decides to say, apropos of nothing, that if Ire falls to the Overmind, then the entire universe is in jeopardy. And it's like, well, I guess you have to have some stakes because you didn't establish them previously. Like, for whatever reason, losing our homeworld wasn't enough of a problem. Like, he could maybe have said, like, oh, Raynor, if Ire falls, there will be nothing to stop the Overmind from taking over all the Terran colonies, too. And that would be enough stakes, too. Like, they would be like, okay, well, yeah, I have to make my stand with you guys here now. Like, great, that's enough. You don't have to say the whole galaxy or the whole universe or whatever. It's like, it's just stupid. And it's unbelievable, too. Like, if there's no other races in the whole game...
Turns out he was a shitty prophet all along. Yeah. Because it didn't happen.
Yep. Not only that, like, Tassadar wasn't even a real character, and actually it was entirely some Xel'Naga the whole time, which is so stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the worst twist possible. But, like, the thing about Tassadar's example that really gets me, it's like, yeah, we're paranoid or insecure about the level of oomph that our writing actually has. So we're just going to throw this random shit out at left field, and it's going to be epic and impactful, isn't it? Because now the whole universe is at stake, so there must be stakes. You got to make sure that you stop this guy, because otherwise the whole universe is like, fuck off, dude. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Yeah. So that's just like some of the things that bother me, and I feel like with how popular the Marvel movies have been getting, although there's a big backlash against them in general, like people are turning on them, but like for a long time they have dominated what people think is good writing or whatever, and
I don't know how.
Yeah, it's really sad. Like even the best movies in that whole franchise are still pretty bad. Like
I watched. Well, I've seen the first couple X-Men movies way back when they came out. I saw Batman Begins. I think it was Dark Knight or something.
Yeah.
The first couple of those. Yeah. But more importantly, more recently, I decided I was going to see what this Avengers stuff is all about. And I watched... I forget the names of them, but the first one where Thanos appears. And then...
I guess that's Infinity War you might be thinking of.
Infinity War. There was two of them. I couldn't be forced to watch the last one. Because the first two were so fucking bad. So bad.
Well, the weird thing about Infinity War is that it's building on like every movie that came before it. So if you didn't see most of those, then you don't really have, like, even if you only watched the Avengers movies, there's like characters from a film called Guardians of the Galaxy that are just in there. And you, like, if you don't know who they are because you didn't watch those because you only watched the Avengers movies, like the ones that are titled Avengers : whatever, then like, you're not going to have much context anyway. Yeah. But like Infinity War is probably the most impressive one. I was able to take
that, but it was so badly written that I never felt compelled to go back to those either.
Was the first one you watched the one where it opens with Thanos beating up the Hulk or whatever? Because that's the one that's Infinity War. I don't know which one you actually watched.
No, it was... The Hulk wasn't even... The guy couldn't even turn into a Hulk in any of these for, I guess, reasons from his previous movies. But in the first one, it was when he was on the ship with Thor or whatever. Yeah, and then... So the first one is... I honestly, I don't even know. That could be any one of them. Infinity I don't even know at this point. That's the thing. They don't even have any... Like, I can't even pull them apart because to me, it's just a sea of bad CGI, like really like low tier shit, and really awful dialogue. Diversity inserts fucking everywhere. Like holy shit, Wakanda! You seriously got the fucking Zulus out with their little spears and shields that are made out of energy. Like that doesn't make any sense at all. Just use fucking guns like a real person. And then they're gonna stand out there in the field like it's fucking Troy or something with this huge shields, and then they're fighting against things that are like 4 or 5 times their size.
Yeah, that's you're thinking of
muscle.
Infinity War for sure. So what that is basically that opens up with Thanos beating Hulk up, and then Hulk can't Hulk out ever again afterwards. So he's like wearing the big Thor or the big Iron Man armor afterwards.
Yeah,
which is actually called Hulkbuster because it's what Iron Man used to beat up Hulk.
Yeah, he used it against Hulk. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you're right. Wakanda is specifically really stupid because, like, basically that is the most racist depiction you could think of for a futuristic, like, African nation, since they ride rhinos and use spears instead of like actually using real technology.
And then there's this massive disconnect. It's white people trying to be progressive. It's
well,
just
hey,
so
in the
full of
sequel
shit.
to the Black Panther movie that they mostly made because the actor who was playing Black Panther died. They have like a white savior arc, which is like totally unintentional as far as I can tell. So that's great. So yeah, it's just all slapstick.
But I don't understand. Like, how do those movies ever take off with the writing being as bad as it is? Like, the dialogue is just there's nothing. There's no stakes to anything that's going on. Thanos is just not a threatening character. The fight sequences lack any energy behind them whatsoever. The choreography is just terrible.
Yeah.
Like, even Game of Thrones does way better choreography than they do.
Well, the biggest problem with the choreography...
The violence is all comical. I mean, it is a superhero movie, but it's like, you can do more with it. Like, Batman did more with it.
Yeah. Well, the biggest problem with the choreography, in my opinion, is the fact that all of their characters have all of these ridiculous powers, and most of them don't get used in any of the fights.
Yeah, like Thanos has like these gems of ultimate power, and they get used in the most slapstick, predictable manner possible. That just is like, it just doesn't make really much sense at all.
Well, there was the fight scene where they tried to stop him from closing his fists so that he can't use the power, which I thought was that was probably the most interesting fight in the whole movie. But like, because at least then like he's going to use it to because he can defeat them with whatever those powers are. It's just that when he later uses them, it's also not very interesting.
Yeah, so. It's just like, I'm just going to shoot this beam that can be stopped by conventional metals.
Great.
We go back to the discussion we had about futuristic materials, and well, what about a crystal that emits? It's literally supposed to be the gem of destruction or whatever, and it can't actually even corrode this little shield out of earth metals or whatever. It's like,
well, the Captain America shield is made of.
After all,
dude, Captain America's shield is made out of the same stuff that landed in Wakanda, so it's African.
Oh yeah, isn't like Captain America's shield like made out of the same thing that Avatar is based off of?
No, Avatar is unobtainium, and Captain America's shield is vibranium, bro. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, vibranium. No, I can think of a few uses for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just like, if that's the bar that people have set for present writing, we as a species are over. That's over. It is bad.
Well, the reason why film execs think that that's good is because it has sales. And, you can say maybe people... It has
well, that's the same with games, right? Oh, it sold well, so it must be doing good.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is, like, they haven't caught up to the fact that... I mean, films are made across, like, a 2 or 3 year time span or whatever, so you would expect it's going to take a little bit for it to update. And
now writers have a habit to strike because shoveling through manure and puking onto someone's lap doesn't make you enough money.
Classic.
Fucking scumbags.
Don't worry, they'll be replaced. If they're not already replaced by AI, I don't know what's happening, to be honest. But
I mean, they have been in many cases. There are already AI-generated advertisements and commercials and shit. Yeah. So, and I think there has been for a long time, honestly. No, writing, like, to make any of these big, epic things work, stuff has to be believable and grounded at the base most level.
Yes.
Right.
You have to be able to write a competent...
You start with technical shit.
Yeah, you have to be able to write a competent baseline idea, right?
Because having the technicals figured out means you've got something that is believable. Now you can put a character in it, and you know how they're going to behave, how they're going to react, what's normal, what isn't normal, what's going to govern those situations. And then you build up. And that's how you get stakes and shit. Yeah. Like, in an ideal world, Tassar wouldn't have to say anything to Raynor. It's her fucking homeworld is under attack.
Yeah.
How many fucking people live here? It's the heart of our species. Like, that's stakes enough. It goes without saying.
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't have to say anything. It's like, dude, we're fighting to protect our homeworld. Like that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We don't even need to say anything about it. It's like, I don't think anybody in like Ukraine or Russia is saying about we need to do this because this, except in media being spouted off to Western fucking pigs.
Well, yeah, it's actually
they get it. Like there's
Yeah.
shit's happening all around them. Like they get it, right?
Yeah. Those people get it. The Westerners have to be told that if Ukraine falls, the rest of Europe is next, or whatever.
Yeah,
So yeah,
if
they
Ukraine
actually have the
falls-
same Tacitar line, but for, you know,
Yeah. It's honestly, like, I cannot believe it works.
yeah,
I can't believe any of that works in any context. Like repeatedly, this example has been given to me of that VTuber who's like, I like sitting in line because I just turn off my brain.
yeah.
Like, people just don't have internal monologue.
Yeah.
And the whole NPC meme is so goofy, but the more and more you think about it, the more and more I'm exposed to the average gamer, really many thousands of quotations here, gamer, the more I realized it's not a meme, that reality really is dumber than fiction.
Yeah. Of course. Well, whoever's
'Cause, like,
writing
in it-
reality is also not very good at writing.
In a real world, we wouldn't even ever need to have this conversation. Like, none of this stuff even bears mentioning to me. It's just like, this is just how things
Yeah.
are. But then I watched those 2 movies,
Yeah.
and they were just horrendous, end to end. And I just like, it's like, there's some films I can watch just for the action.
Yeah.
Like,
I wonder if you've seen John
oh,
Wick.
I forget the name of it. It was this really over the top. I may have mentioned it way back, something assassin or whatever. It was just all choreography and all fighting. It was quite entertaining. And someone had me watch Hard Boiled recently, which is a Hong Kong film, and that was also entertaining. And it's just like goofy over the top. You got every bullet creating showers of sparks, the endless magazine syndrome.
Yeah.
But like the choreography and the action was entertaining, and there was just enough writing just to keep you, into it, which was like, that's all an action film really needs. But then going
you
through
should
Avengers,
check out
it
the
had none of
first
that.
John Wick movie, because it's
John
probably,
Wick.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a name I heard before. I think I was thinking about trying that out too.
Yeah, it's the first one is definitely the best. The other ones, I guess they have. If you can tune out how autistic the plot gets, it's probably fine for the action. But yeah, like, it's that's like similar vibes to what you were describing with Hard Boiled, anyway. So.
Yeah, because I like going through, like, because again, I went through a binge of like old kung fu movies and old 007 movies when we were doing that last move. And that's when I wrote out that article about those videos and how there was this big shift in like the mid 90s. And, but like the Ip Man movies were pretty good. Although they change the writing, they change from history quite a bit. But, the actual like it's enough for the movie, like it's enough to be grounded in. Like, I think they're probably some of my favorite modern film productions in general. Same with Hero, and it's just like even if you just like take aside how they're made and artsy fartsy stuff and just go to just how the characters are written, their dialogue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is most of these protagonists and villains and stuff like that, they don't have anything really super extraneous. They don't go to all these efforts to be flashy or whatever, but they still fit all the roles well because they're all believable. You can believe them. The fact they don't try too hard. It's really the big thing, is they don't try too hard.
And that goes back to the stakes thing too. Yeah, it's the same kind of
it's
thing.
just like, you can get stakes just by it being believable, right?
Well, yeah, because
Just by it being
believability makes
believable.
you invested. Like,
No.
so one of the things that I'm making sure I'm keeping an eye out for is, in this campaign, like, you have a protagonist character and then you have like a sidekick character, basically, and it's going to be like I'm probably going to make it co-optional, in the sense that you can optionally play with a second human player, but basically the idea is that you'll have the same ally like the whole way through.
A Tard Wrangler.
Yeah, there you go. So you got your guy, and I want him to be like, a little quippy, but also believable. Like, not like he's leading an army, he's losing men, like, this is serious shit, obviously. But I want him to have like the way that he deals with it is by, making light of these situations, or like pointing out the good stuff, so to speak, the fun stuff, or or like the stuff that you might be able to laugh at if you could see it that way, and just sort of like try not to take things super seriously all the time. And that's maybe his coping mechanism or whatever. But I could easily see that somebody might think of that as like, oh, this guy's just not believable in this circumstance, right? Now, like, obviously, I would disagree in that context, but like, I can see where that would maybe serve up as a conflict.
It's a fine line to tread.
Yeah, it's something that you have to make sure, like, you know, like how you write him is going to be significant. If he's always got a joke for every situation, then it's going to be too much. And funnily enough, in a lot of these Marvel movies and etc., there is this syndrome where they go it down. Like every single time there's any moment of any significance emotionally or in terms of stakes or whatever, like a character, like so in one of the recent Thor movies, they literally made a joke about a character having like stage 4 cancer, like like that was that their idea was, well, this is dark, so we're going to make a joke or something. I don't know what their actual idea was, but that seems to be what it was. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know if that fucking works. Like, it's a little bit much. And then on top of that, you also have to deal with the fact that, like, basically anytime you have an opportunity for actual character discussions, it's, like, undercut with a joke. Any serious moment, undercut with a joke. So, like, you don't linger on it too much or whatever. And then, because I don't know why. Maybe that's challenging too much or something. I don't know. But, like, I definitely don't want it to even be remotely comparable to that. So I have to make sure that not every line is a joke. Like, a lot of his lines are going to be somewhat matter of fact, where he just is reporting what he's seeing or whatever, or what he's planning on doing. And then you'll get the more, like, maybe happy-go-lucky vibe or something, like joke-y, quip-y vibe from him, just by the way that he talks, instead of necessarily by, like, him actually having a joke. He might just say, like, you know, where more conventional commanders might say, I've just set up an expansion. He might have some line where he says, like, I feel a lot better with this base in operational. Let's go kick some ass, something like that, right? So he's like a little bit more. You could even call it laid back or something like that. But the point of it is to provide more of an opportunity for him to be this, like, endearing character that you value his contributions or whatever. Like, that will also, if you are invested in a character, then there's natural stakes, because you don't want these guys to die. You don't want these guys to be like, you want these guys to be successful. You're invested in their war. You at least want to know where it goes. Like, if it's not successful, it can still be satisfying if, like, they get most of the way there and they fail initially, and maybe that sets up like a sequel story or something. Who knows, right? But, like, the point is, like, you want to have that investment in the character, and that starts with it being believable. Like you said, that starts with it being grounded, being something that you can look at and say, okay, this makes sense. This works for me. I can see where the stakes are in the story. I can see what these characters are trying to do. I can see how challenging their task actually is. And then, like, ideally, obviously, also the enemies. Like I was saying, I don't want the opposing faction to be this cartoon villain shit. I want it to be more considerate and say, like, we're at the end of the day, if you're successful in your first mission, you're taking down these more organized military folk based on your partially based on your investment from the benefactor, partially based on the fact that you got the surprise on them. Like, this does mean that you can start to maybe get a groundswell of support, and maybe you can genuinely do this, and then you can look to fend for yourself after, once you're sort of establishing your own unique little nation on this planet, instead of it being like an independent colony or whatever, instead of being like under the heel of these people. So, like, that's all very grounded and believable, and nowhere in it does there have to be, like, grand scale stakes or whatever. Like, it's just natural. You would naturally want to follow these people around and see what they do if I play my cards right with the dialogue and with the presentation. But yeah, like you're saying, there's not really an opportunity for you to get invested in that same sense. Like, I mean, even with these more slapstick movies, like, you were talking about these crazy action sequences and stuff where they have infinite magazines and they, the bullets are ridiculously over impactful or whatever. And to some degree, you'll even see this in Quentin Tarantino films, where anytime there's a gunshot, which there often is, it's like there's fucking ridiculous amounts of blood that comes out, and, like, the gore is just, like, kind of over the top in that sense. And, like, that's almost like his style of filmmaking, is that he celebrates the spectacle part of it or whatever. And, like, if that's going to be the style, you can very quickly adapt to that as your, like, the reason why we're able to talk about, like, aliens and crazy, wacky, cosmic horror stuff or whatever and take it seriously and still be potentially invested is because we have that suspension of disbelief that can carry over. And it doesn't have to be like real world, obviously. But again, I mean, I don't know, like restating all the basics shouldn't be necessary, but for the fucking drivel that you end up dealing with on a regular basis, whenever you engage with modern media, it is quite necessary because they don't seem to get that part. They're just going to say, you know, like that. I think I said this before on this episode, on this podcast, but there's a scene in the most recent reboot of God of War, the first one, where like the boy picks up grabs the knife from his mother's burning corpse because they're like cremating her, and it like burns into his hand or whatever, and he drops it, and he's like, you know, Kratos looks at him and he's like, that used to be hers or something. It's like, yeah, he just fucking took it off her corpse, dude. Like, I think he knows who it used to belong to. What the fuck? Like, why do you even have to have that right? Like, down to the basics of like individual points of dialogue. Because he follows that line up with, it's yours now. And if he just said that, that would be way more impactful, right? It's like,
no.
Like, you know, oh, you just like burned yourself a little bit, like my way, instead of showing compassion for the wound or something that you'd normally expect out of a father, maybe instead, like, no, it's like, well, you took that, it's yours now. Like that's it. That's all you need to say is it's yours now. And it would have been way more impactful, significantly more impactful. Instead, it's just shit because you like, obviously we know whose knife it was. It's a line said for nobody. It doesn't make sense for the viewer because they know whose knife it was, and it doesn't make sense for the kid because he obviously knows whose knife it was. So it just is a line with no purpose. And like, okay, I'll focus in on that line for the point of it, but that kind of thing is everywhere. There's so many lines that have no point.
Absolutely. It's like many times not speaking.
Yes. Yeah.
Offers a lot more. Absolutely.
Or very minimal dialogue, right?
Yeah.
Like one word or one sentence is like that can be enough a lot of the time.
Especially when it's used in the contrast too.
Yeah.
At times you might expect there to be dialogue, but the character can say a lot by not having it within specific points, right? So
yeah. And
it's absolutely a main thing that you can. It's a nuance, and you don't see it because. You know, the only people who end up writing dialogue for games is people who failed as writers or they failed at some other job, so they won like the lowest hanging fruit they could get to claim they were successful.
Right.
It's very common. Like Metzen, for example. He was just the guy who helped them move furniture. Oh, yeah. I scribble on the side. Oh, yeah. I like to write. I run D&D games.
I am the war chief, guys. Didn't you know?
I am the war chief.
I can't believe that.
I can believe.
I can't believe.
You know, it takes a special kind of degenerate to publish Warcraft 3 and put your name on it with any sense of pride, any sense of just anything besides just guilt.
Yeah.
Immense guilt. Even if you despise humans as a species, you would probably show them mercy as opposed to subjecting them to Warcraft 3.
Isn't it so good, guys? Isn't it such a great game? Because you can tell because it was replaced by a map. It was usurped by a map, guys. And that's how good it was. I get, you know what? We were talking about stuff that's like recap or whatever, and it's fitting that it took us like almost 2 hours for me to even remember that more info has come out about Stormgate, because who the fuck cares?
Oh yeah, there are little scribbles that look like something from maybe like a NetEase phone game, which is what they got replaced with, is a NetEase phone game, because that's Diablo Immortal is a reskin NetEase game, and that was more valuable to Blizzard than the contributions of anybody building Stormgate. And you know, when you think about it, it says a lot, and this says a lot more than anything Stormgate's shown about itself, because all it's ever shown is just vomit. Mm-hmm. But you realize that these were the people who were ejected out of a company known for producing only manure. You know, it really puts into perspective where that ship is sailing.
Right down shit creek, obviously.
Oh.
Oh man. There was something of actual significance and interest that I was going to say, and now I forgot it because of fucking Stormgate, but let me think back to that. We were talking about the nuances of like characters saying nothing when they could be saying something, and we were talking about how you don't see that kind of nuance often. Fuck, man, what was the thing I was going to say? It was a big, good point. So one thing I have noticed is it's kind of in the example of the Star Wars thing that I was talking about, where the prequels came out and they identified or over-explained something to the point where it lost all of its mystery. It lost all of its significance and interest. And I want to get your opinion on this, because I have basically noticed that, like, there's this weird push and pull where, as a writer, like, okay, your first time showing something is significant. It's important. It sets the tone. It sets up expectations. But on some level, later times exploring the same thing that's already been established can sometimes be more challenging, because anytime something has screen time, there's got to be significance to it. And so anytime there's something that, like, takes up time for the player or for the audience or whatever, there's got to be value to exploring it a second time or a third time or whatever. And the tacit expectation of an audience is usually that this is going to be explored more. I'm going to get more information about this. I'm going to get more details about this. For good or for ill, the idea is that the audience will be treated to additional content or revealed more details about a certain thing. And the mark of, like, a really good writer, generally speaking, is that the more you learn, the more interested you remain. And instead, usually what ends up happening is, like, the only interesting things about any IP, any world, any game or movie or whatever are the things that they don't actually explain. Because if they did explore them, if they did shed more light on them and reveal more details, it would probably be bad and boring instead of being more interesting, right? And that's sort of like people think about, like, laws of, like, so-and-so's first law, like Pr0nogo's 69th law is of writing or whatever, is like you basically, the more times you show something, like, you have to reveal something additional, you have to explore something additional, otherwise it's going to feel like treading water and doing pretty much nothing. You're just spinning your wheel in mud. But if you reveal if it turns out that there's not that much substance to it, then when you reveal more about it, it just dissolves and stops being interesting. And I'm that's just a phenomenon, an aspect of writing that I've noticed, but I'm interested in what you think about that, because I'm sure you found out something along those lines in your time writing.
Probably the most challenging parts with D&D. So, within the last few sessions, they've learned a fair bit, or rather, the main game has kind of caught up to Autumn Wind in terms of what they know about what's going on. And they basically had a chain of discussions due to stuff they did where they brought about the reincarnation of one of the divine daughters. And then we're talking with one of the horsemen and kind of learned about everything related to all that and bits and pieces of it. And you look at this and it's like, on one hand, you want to hold back a lot of this information for a long time. On the other hand, you're 6 years into a game. Maybe there is time to tell information about some stuff and give some grounding to things. And you awards their efforts in the game and out of character to both extents as well. At the same time, though, you also are setting the foundations for the next kind of stages as well. So when I look at information for a lot of stuff, it's like there are things you will never know. There are things that even I don't have answers for. Like, if we look to, like, in Apex X, we talk about these cosmic horrors, the vestigial stars and other stuff like that. We might see them, we might communicate with them, we might fight them, but we'll never really understand them. We never really understand how they came to be, or really a lot of that. And even in SS, if we do interact with them, there's so much underlying unknowns. They're like the surface of an infinitely dark sea. Everything related to Orizom and the great beginnings, where that came from, how things came from it. Most of those probably will never be discovered. Should they be discovered? Should they be something you can discover, and will it change the shape of things? I think that the possibility to get these things should be there, but they should be a part of the conclusion. Sometimes when you do discover things, they can help you to bring closure to things. Understanding things can help you bring a closure. That's often how I see it. Is that understanding comes with conclusions. And, like, with the way that I am seeing the revealing of some of the information right now, is we are preparing for the next like stages of the game. We're helping putting pieces on the table so that when the players get out of their current situation, they maybe can understand maybe what they might want to try to do next. It gives them some information to work with and gives some context to the things that have happened prior in the game that maybe seemed random or strange or inexplicable. And also setting the stages for possible things that could have happened or whatever. And in arming of that knowledge, we now, in some ways, know things that allows us to bring closure to stuff that happened way back. So, for example, they didn't really understand. There's one of the main opponents they've been dealing with are called the Forgotten. And they are like these smoke demons. And for some reason, they pretty much are all cats, with the exception of a few that are influenced by very specific things. Nostradamus has fish, and Amistrea had foxes, but most of them are cats. Nobody really understood why they were cats. Well, they learned that the reason why they're cats is because the first one that came to the world talked to a young woman and asked her, what shape should I take? And she was basically a crazy cat lady. So she's like, I like cats. Cats are noble. And then that initial creature called the Pioneer, incidentally, then asked her, what is it that humans fear? And she said, I don't really like spiders. So now you have the de facto core shape of these things being a spider cat. And everything to spawn after it was afflicted by basically a curse. Their manifestation is a curse. Their natural form is light, and a curse gives them manifestation. That curse, that manifestation, is what gives them the shape as a cat, and that came from the originator, from that one decision all the way back. So all the Dark Star yokai are basically all cats, and all of their descendants, down to the finest, most base level, are basically cats. And all these cats have different influences depending on how they were shaped or what other parts of the curse exist. And some are not cats as a result of certain curses being so powerful, like when the aspect of spite is influenced so much by the various hosts that it had changed around that it became basically a giant metallic centipede. It became a very, very aggressive form of aversion, which is spite. But the majority of them are cats. So they didn't know that there was an origin to this until Autumn Wind to a point, and then that was reaffirmed within Starsworn. And they learned about that quite a long time after first encountering them and wondering why they were all cats. So now we answer that question. We don't necessarily take a big chunk of mystery out of this. We point to an origin. We kind of reorient things onto the Pioneer, which was destroyed within Autumn Wind, but some legacy of it still remains in SS. And with SS, a part of the intent for SS was to translate the Apex world into it in such a way where we have a grand scale to everything. But eventually what it ultimately boils down to is the interaction between individuals. So part of answering questions that I view with this is to direct energy spent on trying to demystify things into how to resolve characters, either through how you fight them, how you maybe fight them and turn them to your side, how you destroy them, how they interact with everything else, where their relationships with everything is. Ultimately, it's going to come down to character versus character things, with a lot of the technical stuff or other information serving more as a backdrop and just the tools that shape those interactions to some extent. So it was a question that did have to be answered at some point, because while it was a mystery, it was one of those mysteries that help give shape to what the ultimate goal is. I think that when you look at the end goal of what you have and what you want to show, then when you look at revealing information and demystifying things, I view that as ways to give shape to what that ultimate end goal is. And like I said, there's things that you won't ever know the answer to, because they should be mysteries. They should be unknowable. The entire point of them is to be unknowable. But for many things, the point of being unknown is for you to pursue discovery, because discovery is a part of growth, and D&D is ultimately about growing, and going through a game is ultimately about growing, whether it be through skill or through understanding. That's why in Apex X, a lot of this dialogue and stuff like that is completely optional, because I think most people are going to be going through it just for the the gameplay, and that's it. And that's fine. You can go through that. When you have these companions, like the cat companion, they may say things, but it's going to be quite concise. So there's really going to be like, you open the door, you complete the puzzle. There will be context-sensitive dialogue. Like if you destroy all these generators to open this door beforehand, the area member is going to make a comment like, "Oh, proactive as always, I see," and maybe make little comments about that. But to go through things and to discover things is also a part of exploring and progressing in the project as well. So I treat it very measuredly, and I often ask a lot of questions like this. At what point should you reveal things? What is worth revealing? I feel like the difference to me between what is something that should be shown and what isn't is what offers pursuit. What would drive pursuit to find things? So in SS, we answered a lot of questions about what are the Forgotten, where they came from, what their origin is. And we pointed crosshairs on specific characters that should be goals for the party to deal with or try to deal with, and objectives for them to try to control. So we kind of dispersed a bit of the mystery surrounding the happenings, at least regarding them. But there's still a lot of unknowns about like these characters or whatever that got incarnated by Orizom, even though Orizom's not even supposed to be active anymore. Why is it doing that? What's the end result of that? What influence are they going to have when we start focusing more on the characters? And that was my goal really from the very beginning, was to take these things, have you explore them, and then shed some light on specific entities and how you're going to interact with them and how you want to interact with them. It's ultimately going to be up to the players if they choose to really follow these threads or focus on other things, or if they're going to really invest themselves in any of the stuff that's going on or whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when they get out of the current area and the game opens up again, and where they actually choose to focus their objectives at that point, because they will have access to more contacts and connections and ability to do stuff. And like D&D to me is just such a grand experiment because I've never done anything like this at all. So maybe I'm doing things wrong in many different ways. Maybe these are all non-standard. Maybe there's too much things you can do. Maybe I revealed too much. I'm not sure. I really won't know until we go through the entire thing and I really reflect on it a lot. But in terms of like a more linear game, something like Apex X is like, I always see exploration of the writing and the stuff like that as part of the exploration of the actual content. To me, they're one and the same. So I see revealing stuff and revealing information and stuff like that as part of the progression. And it should feel like it's a part of giving further pursuit to reaching the conclusion. And I prefer endings that give answers, at least to the point that they answer how and why things were the way they were, why they had to be the way they were, or how they ended up that way. There's many of these games I have finished that just you leave your head scratching and wondering that was it, right? Like that's the thing I want to avoid the absolute most.
Yeah, it feels like it's, and I'm sure you can echo this sentiment in general, it feels like it's very frustrating that people don't put much thought into their things, right? Like you were giving, you once again provided the example of the person who just thinks of nothing when they wait in line. And I feel like there's people who think of nothing or something similar to nothing when working on something. And it's like, why don't you put any thought into this, right? And I don't know if it's just that they don't care or they don't know any better. Like, is it ignorance? Is it lack of effort? Is it laziness? I don't know. Like, and maybe it doesn't matter. Like, maybe it's always stupid, regardless.
Writing is just not be treated seriously by anyone.
Yeah, that's
that's
quite possible.
You got the how did she describe them? You got the incredibly pretentious writers.
Yeah,
that are just. A lot of old ones are like that too.
Well, and you think of Laconius's dictionary, thesaurus hunts with
very similar,
vile aggressions dialogue, right, and stuff like that.
If it's not even the vocabulary, but even like what they write, just tends to be absurd. But she actually gave me an example of what she considered a good. Her tastes are very distinct. and I would never be able to dredge it up here because there's just pages of dialogue. But there was some French author wrote a book about a character that basically recalled his taste in art and maybe some dreams or something. And it was something with no structure in it. And I might read that sometime and get back to you on that. But it was just like, you have everybody kind of like recognizes what is bad writing. Like, no matter what their tastes really are, like they recognize overly verbose, pretentious stuff, which is very commonly associated with white writers. And you have what is, game writing, which isn't even writing. Like, I can't really think of too many games I've played where I even think they even had an actual writer on staff. Certainly nothing Blizzard has done, for example. Nothing really, like in the West, it's really arguable at all. I think in the East, for you to really get into actual real writing, you actually have to get into really obscure niche shit. And especially nothing that's been westernized. And it's just because the West just doesn't put any value in writing. Like, people acknowledge what is bad writing, but they just don't care. Like, people just don't care. People are just too willing to accept less. They're too willing to accept lower quality, lower bar.
Yeah.
They know that better can exist. They're just willing to accept it. It's not just like with writing, it's with everything. It's like, how many people have I heard that say, oh, Bethesda games are buggy, I guess I'll go buy another one.
Yeah.
Like, just ask for more for your money and you'll get more. Everybody sees it.
Yeah, I'm really quite surprised, I guess, that the more I go into my own niche, I guess, the more I turn inward and continuously work on my own thing and put all this thought into stuff, and like, same as when I'm writing like these rules for the tabletop setting, and then I made a character for the one shot Kian wants to run, and I was like, wait, this is actually how it works though? Like, this is a little silly, like, whatever. It's like
I still say that to this day, 6 years into running this fucking campaign. This is how that works?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I guess, I don't know. Like, I don't really know. Like, the thing is, dude, I don't feel like I'm that different than the average person, but I guess I must be, because when I like sort of wake up from my stupor of working on my own shit forever, and then I look around, I take a temperature check of the world, it's all stupid. It's all like, oh man, what is going on? So
I had an awakening moment like that very recently. Actually, okay. I was doing research, as I always do, for Unreal, trying to figure out this fucking retargeting shit.
Oh yeah, you said that you found another project. Is this what you're talking about?
Yes. Okay. There was a guy who was using assets from the same author that I was using, and I wondered, did he ever manage to fix the hand alignment?
Yeah.
And it can't tell in his videos because they're incomprehensible.
Right.
But he has a downloadable demo of his game, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll try this out and I'll just figure it out for myself. And if he figured it out, I can throw him an email or something and be like, hey, how'd you do this? Oh, man. Oh, boy. Ah, dear. So, allegedly, 3 years of development has not come within even the shadow of something that I built with no prior knowledge in the same amount of time frame, but with way less man hours, assuredly, given all the shit that has happened in my life to that point.
Yeah.
Running a D&D game, doing LPs, CMBW shit, everything, any fucking day of the week, there's crazy shit going on. And you've got what amounted to, like, I can't even put, like, literally not a single fucking thing worked properly. It was like you had walked into, like, if Blizzard made an action RPG, this is what it would look like. Just, you touch something, the whole screen just shakes like there's a fucking magnitude 8th earthquake. The motion blur and temporal anti-aliasing felt like they had been increased from default as opposed to reduced or removed like they should be. Like, just, there was no actual, I don't even know why it was even downloadable. It was just a horrendous fucking mess. And I came out of that, and I recorded that, and that's in that Red Pill Roundup. And I came out of that, and I said something like, I guess if I ever feel like I haven't done enough in the last 3 years, I just got to look back at this, because, when I go through Unreal and I produce a demo or something to look at, I'm like, man, I should have been able to do so much more with how much fucking time I put into this at this stage. and there's still so much that is missing. But anytime I look at what other people have done with Unreal, regardless of what genre it is, regardless if it's a studio or not, it is always shockingly bad. Just bad. And like, not just like, oh, it's incomplete because the guy hasn't put much time in it. It's just like the decisions behind it are terrible.
Yeah.
Over and over and over. Like, I know more than anyone that shit's gonna be incomplete or a little buggy or a little awkward or maybe a little clunky or you're missing assets or whatever the fuck. But holy shit, the things that people feel fit to put on the internet is like awful. There was an observation I may, or maybe you even brought up a while ago, that the internet, it's too easy to put stuff on the internet now.
Yes.
And it's just like filled with so much garbage.
Yes.
Like the internet now retains garbage more than anything else.
Yep.
Because before, in order to put shit on the internet, you had to go through some degree of effort to put it on the internet. So at least usually the stuff you would go out and find, like little GeoCities sites or whatever, or something somebody was paying for, you may at least put through the effort of actually getting up there, and that took some degree of effort. That in itself was a filter. But now that's way harder than it used to be. Way harder, if not outright impossible or financially unfeasible for anybody besides a business.
Yeah.
But what you do have is all the social media bullshit that does nothing but retain garbage. Just oceans and oceans and oceans of garbage. And it destructively holds that garbage too, because you have WebP that destroys everything it touches. You have these middleware like Kraken.io that downgrade. They literally exist to go on your server and to just take all your images and shred their quality to reduce the file sizes, because fucking storage and bandwidth is cheaper than it's ever been. But companies figure out they can charge more for it because everything is on social media now. Yeah. The demand for direct download went down. The demand for quality and more permanent storage went down. So the actual price of it went up. And instead you have social media and it's just all garbage. And it's like now, like the actual approach to people putting content on the internet has also changed as a direct result, where people don't even think twice about throwing up just absolute shit. There's no fucking standards anywhere from anyone on anything, any platform, any medium. It is just impossible to find people who give a shit about quality. I was just being told earlier this morning about companies pushing fucking CD pressings of Napster MP3s, and this has been confirmed. So you have CDs that the files on them are actually just MP3s. Okay. They've been transcoded from MP3s that have been downloaded off the fucking internet. And
the most
my transfer exploded.
RNG way of deciding how high audio quality it is.
Yeah, so if you look at the spectrum waveform, I've shown you guys plenty of examples of that. I had UED Commander send me files from D2 Remastered, and I immediately found out that they're literally just the old D2 files, the same fucking 22K HD files or whatever they are, and they just applied a slight equalizer to them. So you still have that insane cutoff. All the quality is gone from the high range. They just tried to artificially reinflate it again with some shitty filter, and that was it. Like, I understand that Blizzard just has absolutely no fucking management at all in their company, and they continually lost their gold CDs and source code and fucking everything, but holy shit. D2 is mostly commercial CD assets. Just redo them. Take it from the commercial CDs, for God. They probably just didn't want to pay a license for it or something again. Like nobody gave a shit. Nobody gave a shit. And people still keep paying them for it. You know, you have this other problem I know I brought up before, where you have games like Final Fantasy XIV that are subscription-based. And then they have a fucking cash shop on top of it. And people ask them to put shit in the cash shop rather than put it in the fucking game.
Yeah. Well,
like, holy shit, man.
I can't ever even, like... So, there's this phenomenon where you think of, like, an evil person or some sort of fucking violent dictator or something, and you think, you know, what would make somebody do something like that? What would make somebody go down that path? And, you know, I can't maybe I just don't have the introspection, or maybe I'm like delusional or something, but I can't imagine actually doing those things. But I would actually apply the same lens to the person who's like, yeah, I'm gonna pay for microtransactions. No, bro, I can't imagine what would make me pay for microtransactions. Like, in the same way as I can't imagine being a violent dictator, I can't imagine being a fucking scab or a fucking pay pig. You know, like, why? What do you get out of it? It's like, I don't know. It's the same thing as like the people who are porn addicts or whatever, I guess. It's like they just need that dopamine. Like, whatever it gets it, even if they're paying for, like, recolors or whatever in a cash shop, you know?
I think that these people are just fundamentally brain dead. Like, something has happened in their development that just paralyzed them in early stages of mental infancy, and they never grew up past that. And parts of their brain just never developed. And again, it's all in part because of the education system we have, where the whole concept of critical thinking is frowned upon, if not outright outlawed. And then again, you know, like we said, media and everything like that is dreadfully bad for that too. And I mean, everybody knows that, oh, the media plays on fears, everything is about ratings and so on and so forth. It was way more diabolical than anybody really realizes until they actually get into what marketing is like and all this other shit. And you know, people are just I just really just think that people are just fundamentally brain damaged for any number of reasons. In many cases, I believe it's all self-inflicted, because you always have a choice to ask for more, to look for more, to expect more, to have standards. It's not really something that can be easily erased from you unless you were fully and entirely encapsulated. And most of the people consuming this shit are at an age group where that is absolutely not an excuse. It is not. Like, the internet is very heavily censored and curated, but it is not entirely at the point where you cannot look between two products and see that one product is better than the other and ask questions about that. What it is at this stage where people are violently and vehemently opposed to the whole process of asking questions about the shit, because anything that threatens to question their own purchasing decisions is seen as a personal attack on them, and they can't have that because good vibes or some bullshit. That was one excuse I saw when somebody else exploded at somebody else for entirely stupid and unrelated reasons. But it's like, we are not quite at the stage, for the vast majority of examples I can think of, where brainwashing is really the acceptable stance, but people have willfully opted into actual brain damage, and they've just allowed themselves to regress or remain in mental infancy, where they cannot fathom that not all games are art just because it's a medium which has visual and audio in it. Like, nothing opts anything out of being subjected to standards at any point, ever. Standards exist for a reason. Expecting quality exists for a reason. Expecting competency exists for a reason. Society is built upon the entire concept of self-improvement and people wanting better. If people didn't want more out of their life, we would still be living in caves eating our own shits. The evolution, advancement, technology, knowledge, education, everything is built upon the fundamentals of asking for more, wanting more. You know, looking towards what is available and thinking things could be improved. And in all cases that we have talked about today in regards to writing, there is just endless examples of how not to do things, how to do things, where the most uneducated rube can look at things and figure out what reads better, what feels better, what is more of a believable, what is less believable, what makes a good experience, what doesn't make a good experience, what is satisfying, what isn't satisfying. And these people just continue to consume absolute dog shit for reasons I don't understand. And then you find the odd person, again, sure, I brought this up before because it's something that strikes me all the fucking time, is people who say they've outgrown games.
Yeah.
I don't really enjoy games anymore. I must have outgrown them.
Yeah.
No, man, it's not you. You don't outgrow entertainment. The brain thrives upon entertainment. What you've outgrown is your taste for shit. And you just don't realize it. You don't infer to yourself in this problem, you don't ask the basic question, why don't I enjoy this? Is something wrong with me? Not necessarily. I think something is beginning to manifest in you that is very right. You're realizing the content being offered to you today is not as good as the content you enjoyed yesterday. This is a very simple and easy answer. What's the answer to this eternal question? You ask for better content. And if people don't give you that content, you don't engage it.
I'm just always blown away by the levels of apologism that is reached. And I guess that's the other thing that we can talk about related to Stormgate is that something that Fagudo has been realizing that the Lard apologists are only now willing to say something bad about StarCraft 2 because Stormgate developers have said StarCraft 2 can be improved. I just like the idea that it takes like a figure of authority to allow these people to actually think. It kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the development of the individual and how they don't seem to actually care about quality that much or whatever. It's like you don't need to have a great education in game design or whatever in order to reach a conclusion that you're talking about with the people who are no longer interested in games. And that conclusion is that games aren't interesting anymore, broadly speaking, right? And yet, you know, for the people who are quote unquote invested in, like, say, the RTS genre or whatever, they refuse to actually criticize a very easily critiqued piece of work, the StarCraft 2 series of campaigns or the multiplayer design of the factions or whatever. You can criticize those for hours and hours and hours and still not be done. But people refuse to do it and have refused to do it. And the only time the sea change occurs is when their replacement Daddy Blizzard is willing to say, yeah, by the way, StarCraft 2 is not great, and here's how we're going to fix it, or whatever. I mean, they don't even say it's not great. They say, this really amazing game has a couple of flaws that we're going to address. And apparently that means, like, heroes in 3v3. I don't know where they got that, but who knows? Who fucking knows? I just think it's funny that there's no, like, actual come-to-Jesus awakening moment where these people are like, wait, it was terrible the whole time, and I was just a goofball? Like, we all had those moments. Like, Mesk, you were talking about how Warcraft 3 was kind of like your real awakening in that respect, where you had disregarded StarCraft's story, but you were like, oh, Blizzard, I mean, they'd probably still make it. I guess Lords of Destruction was another one, the expansion to D2, but... And, like, for me, I was a little bit later to the party than you, but I never thought Warcraft 3 was any good, and I just assumed they'd go back to doing something good when they made StarCraft 2, and boy, was I fucking wrong. And, you know, so, like, yeah, that we've all had those moments individually, and yet there's not really... I don't know, man. It's just really weird to me that there's nobody ever makes any sense. Nobody ever even tries to make something
See, if a terminally autistic child can ask these questions.
Yes.
Why can't 30, 40-year-old dubros with alleged fucking college education ask these questions?
Yeah.
Companies have worked very, very, very hard to try to mask the idea of criticism and hide it and the entire concept of it. But you can't hide the product. You can just look between products and you will just come to your own conclusions, and that's how it all starts. You just got to be open to the idea of thinking for yourself and asking for more and asking the questions why you didn't enjoy this or that or whatever. Like, it just does not compute to me how people could, in any respect, think the Doom reboots are any good. How anybody can think StarCraft 2 is any good. It's just like the plain facts are just not there. They're just not good.
Yeah.
They're not good in comparison to older products. They're not good on their standalone. There is no favorable measurement by any of these things. The only way you could ever think of these products favorably is if you had never experienced games before. And even then, all you would have to do is stop and think about the actual structure of the product that you're playing and wonder why it does so much just to waste your time and nothing more. Why there's no substance in anything that happens. Why everything looks like such garbage. Why the audio design is so bad? Why can't you hear anything distinct in any of these products? Like, is that really how audio should be? Like,
Yeah, should these ginormous hulking demons be able to sneak up on me from behind? Because I can't hear anything?
You just ask the most basic of questions, and like I said, that's when things unravel real quick. And it's just...
Well, you do have to be able to sift through the feedback part, because maybe somebody's complaining because they're bad. But for the most part, yeah, like, you don't even get to the level where you entertain that, because then their skill level is often used as a bludgeon to dismiss their criticism anyway. So, like, one of the things that I thought of was, I wonder how people would react if I got to fucking Grandmaster level in StarCraft 2 and then started to criticize the game. Would they treat me any differently than if I just, obviously I haven't played the fucking game in years. But, like that's just, I'm not actually going to fucking install the game and do that, even though it would probably be shockingly easy, because there's no point in doing that. Like, my critique is either correct or not. It doesn't really matter what my qualifications are, per se. I mean, maybe that persuades you to listen to the critique to begin with. If somebody is like, you know, you hear the fucking tagline like ex-pro StarCraft 2 player talks about how bad the game is or something. But you know, you can go find those all the time. The Korean pros have already been very open about how StarCraft 2 is just a worse game. Like, there's a humorous question that was asked of some esports gurus, I guess, some long-standing esports people who have been around for a long time. And the question was, why did Flash have play much worse in StarCraft 2 when Brood War is a harder game? Not realizing that they fucking answered their own question. It's like, you can't express your skill if StarCraft 2 is easier, right? Like, you can't express your skill as much. So, like, that's the kind of thing where, I mean, you can just look, like you were talking about looking at products, but also you can just look at multiplayer scenes if they exist.
Oh, yeah.
These competitive scenes tell a very different set of stories. Like, this titan of competition that
was the case for a lot of people in StarCraft 2.
Yeah. I mean, Jaedong, obviously. Like, there's a lot of pros who moved on to StarCraft 2 because that's where the money was for a brief period of time. And
even like non-pros, but people involved in the scene, like Artosis or whatever, they all struggled with StarCraft 2 as well for very similar reasons.
Yeah.
Because you could tell just by like when they started, because I was casting some of Artosis' stuff when he first started, and you could tell like he was trying to play Terran like an RTS, but you can't, because the way the supply system and everything is all designed to force you to play a very specific way. He didn't want to play that way, so he struggled a lot.
Yep. Well, he really switched to Protoss in StarCraft 2, which is enough of a fucking... If you know Artosis, he fucking hates Protosses. He thinks they're all apes. But you go to StarCraft 2 and it's a game.
He's not wrong.
Yeah.
Yep.
I also think, to your point about like demanding something better and imagining something better, it's like when I watch pro games of Brood War, as I often do, from Artosis and from, you know, casted from other people or like the ASL stuff or whatever, I'll see games that lasts maybe 3 minutes, and it's because one Zergling got into the base or something. And it's like, well, that's pretty shitty. Like, that's kind of lame. Surely we could do better than that. And then I'll see games that maybe they do get into this interesting macro phase, but then the Defiler comes out and it's just hard counters everything with a Dark Swarm. Or then a Science Vessel arrives and irradiates an Overlord and it kills it. And it's like, wait,
Science Vessel's a really nasty one. Because
well, they
you
just
have like what is the more interesting part of like the Mutalisks and shit, and generally they just instantly disappear once the Science Vessels pop up.
You can't use them anymore. But you also get this weird point and click fight between Defiler and Science Vessel, where you want to plague the Science Vessels, you want a Dark Swarm for your other units, but your Defilers have a timed life because they just get irradiated all the time.
Yeah,
and it's like, what the fuck, dude? Like, why is this the weird mini game that you start playing at the high level?
Yeah, it would be better just to even have AoE units as opposed to the Science Vessel, because point and click is just so boring.
Yeah. So, like, when that happens, I think to myself, okay, this game could be better. And, like, that's a fucking revolutionary thought for the Brood War purists. But, like, that's also something that nobody would even point to as a problem from the StarCraft 2 camp. Because StarCraft 2's meta lives and die by their fucking abilities being overtuned and overpowered. Like, it's not as common as it used to be, but the whole High Templar feedback and ghosts that are sniping is really autistic, and, like, that's always been a problem. Now, ghosts they have, like, steady aim or some shit where they, like, take a shot, and if they take damage while they're charging up the shot, it cancels it. So that's, like, different. I still can't believe that Widow Mines are only hidden after they reveal themselves while their missile is on cooldown, unless there's an armory. If they have an armory, they're cloaked after they shoot. And that's fucking autistic. I can't believe that that's what they decided to do to balance that, is just lock a unit's vision status behind a structure being built. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, that's the most absurd, like, non sequitur possible, in my mind. It's not even like you're researching something, which would still be stupid, but you can't. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Obviously, Cosmonarchy Brood War and our other games are going to like, they deviate very heavily from StarCraft's formula for either game. But as a result, you're going to need to do some adapting if you think that, like, oh, maybe there's something to this and I want to check this out. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I just feel like maybe we are going to move too far away from the average person for them to be like, to give it a shot. I don't know, but I don't really care. Like, this is clearly a better line of inquiry to go down. I think it's just that the result speaks for itself. Now, hopefully, we can get this. This is something I haven't talked with you about recently, but we are trying to get this tournament rolling now that the game is getting more and more stable in terms of crashes and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How's your? It seems like you've gotten a few. Are those old crashes or new crashes that you've been getting rid of?
Old in the sense that they've probably been around for like maybe a few months. So, like when we were playing like the Pr0nogo and stuff, we would often get a crash for that. Now I don't know. We haven't gotten them all, almost certainly, but
no.
The we have significantly reduced the amount. Like, if we play more Pr0nogos, we play more matches in general. If we can play 1v1s and not have crashes for a long time, then that'll give us some idea that, like, hey, this is good. We can make this happen. So yeah, we haven't caught what's causing the desyncs. We haven't caught what's causing some of the initial stuff, but presumably, like, it might all be related. Who knows? And we're getting a little bit closer to being able to test that regularly, because we know that it can happen in just a 1 versus 1 TVT context, the null sprite stuff, which means it's probably something that's just affecting all races. Like, it's probably some general handling for the sprite. Like, Veek found out that the way that he was doing some target checking for the paladin attacks and similar, like, line attacks was not stable, so we fixed that, and we think that was probably the main thing that was causing the stuff that was happening in TVT, because paladins were out at the time. So yeah, it's a bunch of stuff like that. Like, hopefully we've been able to already fix most of them and put them all behind us. But if everything looks good in the next week, I will start to, like, organize, like, a group, and it only needs 3 players. And I was thinking it would be great if you could join me for the cast. We could just do it all at once. I don't know. Yeah. Obviously, like, the way that I've decided to initially go about doing this is, I think the games will not be live casted, because it's unlikely we would be able to organize. In that case, it would be 5 people all at once. It would be you, me, and the 3 players to be available all at once. But what could happen is somebody could be the referee, so to speak, for the match, and they would just, like, keep track of who wins, and then they would send us both replays for that. And I don't know how we would. I think you can watch replays in multiplayer, so we would probably just run the same replay in multiplayer, so that you could also look around and see, like, independently, and not be locked to my spectator.
And also, so we avoid some of the delay.
Right? Yeah, that's true. Because over Discord, there's, like, a brief but noticeable delay. So I think that would probably be how we would handle the casting side of it, and we would just do that whenever, like, we're both available. After the games have been casted. So I did post a link to the description of the format. I don't know if you are aware of how the Ascension style bracket actually goes.
Nope.
So basically, I'll paste this here, and I'll also link it in the description of this video. Basically, there's the players have to be divisible by 3, which is, of course, 3.
That's 3.
And you sort the players into groups of 3, which is 3. And
that's 3 too.
The way that it works is the first matchup is rolled randomly. So, like, say we have Shambler, Veek, and Kian. We randomly roll, and it looks like Kian and Shambler go for the first game. That means that Veek would spectate. I'm thinking the players will be able to spectate the matches as it's happening, which is going to be interesting, because then you'll be able to see, like, whoever wins, you'll be able to identify, like, okay, is there something that I can use to my advantage when I play?
Mm-hmm.
But the winner stays on, the loser takes the next place, and the loser sets out, and the player who is just witnessing takes the next movement. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
the challenger, as I'm calling it, right, the person who's coming up to meet the winner, picks the next map. So that's
Mm-hmm.
also going to be contributing because, oh, Veek is picking, a short map. Is he intending to rush? Something like that, right? Like there
Yeah.
could be all sorts of stuff that happens there. And then if there needs to be a tiebreaker because two players have the same win rate, same number of wins, then you play a tiebreaker. But otherwise, you're playing 7 matches. The first one to get 4 wins is the winner of the group. We probably would play all 7 matches just for satisfaction of oh, can this guy dominate even more and get 6 wins or something? Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But that way you always have the same number of games to cast from each group. And then if you have multiple groups, which I think the first time we won't, but if you have multiple groups, it would be what would be cool about that is being able to say, okay, if you have 2 groups, then they play a best of 5. The winners of each group play a best of 5 to decide the ultimate winner. If you've got 3 groups, then you take all the winners and you make another group and do it all again, which is kind of interesting. And so, there's ways that it scales up, and it talks about that and toward the tail end of the description. But this is what I'm thinking for the first one, and a big part of it is indeed because 3. So I don't know if you have any thoughts looking at this, but I think it should be interesting.
It'll definitely be very different. I used to watch league tournaments and some others.
Yeah.
In this format, it's definitely very different than any of those. So I think it could be interesting.
Yeah, the normal
especially when it
format
comes to the map picking, I think.
Yeah. I think that's really
that will telegraph a lot for sure.
I'm not sure. I think what will happen is you will. I haven't decided if this is going to be the case or not, but the default assumption is that when you play a map, it's no longer available. Except
do you have enough maps to hold out for a long?
Yeah. Well, the map pool that I came up with as an example, we have plenty of maps that are serviceable for that. What I wanted was the map pool. I was gonna say has 3 maps that are kind of even, so they're not super big, but they're not super small. Then it would have 2 maps that are on the smaller side that are better for shorter games or rushes or whatever. And then it would have 2 maps that are on the longer, more macro-oriented side. And that way you could basically, in the early stages of the group, you would be able to pick, oh, I really want to rush this guy. I'm going to pick the rush map or something. And then the first map is... so the first match, which is rolled randomly, nobody picks that map. Instead, it's played on whatever we agree with is the best map. So, if there's the best middle of the road map that's not a rush map but not a super big macro map either, this is just everybody says that this map gives us good games and is, not it's in the middle of those 2 spectrums or whatever. And then tiebreakers would also be played on that map, I think, because again, it's this is the most standard best
yeah,
map
a ground medium, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, that'll be Python.
Yeah.
Or BGH.
Fucking imagine. So yeah, I think this is an interesting setup. It obviously is different than the round robin stuff that you would get out of the league splits back when they were doing. Well, I guess they still do this. I haven't watched it in forever. It's also different than a more standard playoffs bracket or something. The team showdown description is just 1 sentence or whatever, but the idea is that there's a double elimination bracket that's just that means you have 2 tournament lives. So if you lose the first match, you drop to a lower bracket. You play the loser of the the other match that happened, and then it just progresses from there. And so that's more standard for tournaments. But I wanted our first one to be a little bit interesting, and I saw there's a link to the playlist that Artosis ran for his tournament, and I thought that was interesting. I thought it was neat. So I think we could definitely do something similar, and it would just be cooler because it's in CMBW instead of fucking point-and-click adventure StarCraft 1. So there you
go. Hopefully we get a fairly large map pool for that, or player pool.
Right, yeah. The first time around, we only need 3 players, but if we do have enough interest from the word go to get 2 groups, that would be good, because then we would have the ability to... we would have the ability to do all sorts of then you do have that playoff thing. It's not just whoever wins their group is immediately the winner of the whole event, which is what would happen if you only had 1 group, right? Which is a lot more underwhelming. So, yeah, I think we definitely have interest from people. I'm sure it would be cool. I don't know how many people would actually be interested, but off the top of my head, like the names that I rattled off there, Viki and Shambler, that would be enough for the first group. Luciferius said he would be able to make time at some point. I think Helltrix was interested. Obviously, we got Beaver, Mystery Meat, probably some other players. The other thing is that's interesting about this is I planned to like if we have more than one group, I actually planned to distribute the players based on what we think their average skill level is. So you don't have like one group that has like, say like Veek and Mystery Meat are the best players or something like that, right? Like, okay, well we don't want those two in the same group or something, right? That would be like one example. And like you can pick any names for any of that, but that's the idea. Is like if we can give them like a numerical ranking from 1 to 3 or 1 to 6 or however many players there are, we would want the number 1 player and the number 2 player in separate groups, and 3 and 4 would go in separate, and 5 and 6 would go in separate. And that's so that you don't have like one group that's super weak and one group that's super strong, and there's like some parity between them. But that's like a more advanced seeding thing that we might not even need to worry about in the first time. Yeah. But it depends. But I'm going to be working on some, like at least one more melee map with the idea that there will be more options there, and we'll see like if it works out enough to be in the tournament. But I'm definitely interested in getting more people interested. I just feel like if we broadcast a tournament, even if it's just the first one is just 3 players or whatever, which we can easily organize, that will just build this natural idea. And the other idea that I had, that I have no idea how it's going to work out, is I was wondering if it wouldn't be interesting to have this be a season thing. So like basically the player with the most like wins or points or whatever across the whole season gets something at the end of the year or however long the season lasts. So like this would be part of the first season. I don't know though. That's like more grand scale shit that like if we had a, like I know like because Luciferius and Biddy B were both talking about how they would be interested in funding a fucking prize pool for it. And I was like, well, if you're going to do that, like I would want to do it. I would want to do something good and like make it more satisfying or whatever. But obviously it would be ideal to get like 2v2 stuff done. Maybe we could even run this exact same group with teams instead, like this exact same format if we wanted to. So that could also be interesting too. But we'll have to see. It's definitely an opportunity to get some more.
I would expect there to be a lot of feet.
Oh yeah, there will be lots of feet. The bunker is now known as the anchor, and it's going to anchor down and weigh you down and make sure that you're
just like
under
feet.
The feet. Yeah, so got to get your feet on solid ground there. Can't have them flying in the clouds forever. So. But yeah, so
that's why they call you sea legs. Huh? That's what an anchor is. It's just a foot on your sea legs.
That's true. Yeah, the anchors are kind of like the foot of ships, right? The feet of ships.
Yeah, exactly. You think of like a snail too. Snails also have feet, which are also a lot like anchors.
I feel like snails either have 1 foot or no feet, or 1,000,000 feet.
I think they just have the 1 foot. I think that's what it's called.
There you go. Well, are there any other feet facts that you want to share with us at the end of this show? I think that's it. That's all I had planned.
I wish I did. I have to prepare next time.
There you go. We had the shitpost section at the beginning, which we didn't really touch on too much, to be honest. But we should also have the feet closer. There's got to be some catchy name we can come up with for feet. Feet Fact Friday. There you go. So stay tuned for Friday and smoke feet.
All right, smoke feet.